2 o'clock by this clock in front of me, so we'll make a start. First item on the agenda is Sederunt and apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, we have no apologies for this meeting, so we can only assume that the members that are not here are running late.
Chair, Jane did say yesterday that she had every intention of coming, so as much as I know, she's never said anything to me to the contrary.
Councillor Dykes.
I don't know whether it's appropriate or not to bring it up under this particular issue, but it's just really about the make-up of committee, because it's supposed to be a committee of 11, but there's only 9 names on the front of the paper, and I just wondered what the position was over that. Do you want to take it after you've done declarations of interest and before we start, or do you want to?
I'm quite happy to give some advice on that. I spoke with the proper officer before the committee. We have requested from the Independent Conservative Group names of other members that they wish to sit on the committee. I understand that these will be forthcoming, and 2 more members will sit on the next committee. Unless Councillor Cullers, if you want anything to add anything to that. Okay.
That'll answer your question. We'll see in the fullness of time. Item 2, declarations of interest. Councillor Dykes.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to declare an interest. My husband is a director whose company is a member of the Chamber of Commerce, of the FSB and of the Hub. I'm declaring that as an interest, but I fully intend to take full part in all the discussion and questions today.
Councillor Maitland.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for being 2 minutes late. My husband is a director of the Dumfries Chamber of Commerce, and I declare an interest, but like Councillor Dykes, I don't consider my interest such that I have to leave the room.
There's no other declarations. We'll record those for the record, and we'll move on now to item 3. This is the sort of start of our scrutiny review of procurement and commissioning and evidence gathering. Our first, it says presentations, but I think it's more a sort of question and answer session, hopefully whereby we can get sort of information out of you as to what you would like from us and what we can do for you. Today, so everyone knows, we have Gordon Mann, OBE, who is Chief Executive of Dumfries and Galloway Chamber of Commerce, and we have Brian Sherman, Branch Director of the Federation of Small Business, Dumfries and Galloway. We also hope to have, I hope I say this right, is it Wolf Richthofen, who is the Chairman of Wigtownshire Chamber of Commerce, and he's, I think, stuck in traffic or running late, so he will join us eventually, I would think. So, would the two of you like to give just a sort of brief insight into who you are, what you're here for, and then we'll move on to the questions.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, all. My name is, as you've heard, Brian Sherman. I'm the branch chair for Dumfries and Galloway for the Federation of Small Businesses. Now, the Federation exists to provide advice, support and help for small businesses at both local and national levels. And we are the UK's largest business organisation. In Dumfries and Galloway alone, we have around 1,000 business members. These range from sole traders, man power businesses, right the way through to companies with up to 200 employees. At the moment, small business in this region need as much support as possible. We therefore welcome any initiatives that set out to simplify and clarify the procurement process.
Chairman, thank you also for the opportunity to come along and be part of this scrutiny process. The Dumfries and Galloway Chamber of Commerce represents a number of businesses throughout the region. We work very closely with the Wigtownshire Chamber, and I have a number of points that I would like to make to you at some stage, and I'm happy to do those now or during the course of the discussion, if you wish.
Do it through the discussion if you wish, or would you prefer to do them just now?
Well, I can do them now if you like, because I think it kind of sets the agenda that we certainly would like to see. And I think the first thing I want to put on the record is that we recognise the work that's been done by Rona and her team in trying to ensure or to increase the proportion of locally procured goods and services from the Council. It's a good record, and I know that it's been done despite, or I keep forgetting this is being recorded, but it is being done in the face of increasing legislation driven mostly by Europe, but also by UK and by Scotland. That does make it difficult. And certainly if there are issues that come up that need lobbying nationally, then the Chamber would certainly be happy to add its voice to that, to make sure that we have a system that it is fit for purpose for a rural area like Dumfries and Galloway. The second thing is that we pick up a point out of the consultation on the procurement bill, which I think just to quote the words, public sector bodies should be placed under a general duty which requires them to demonstrate the extent to which it is being procured will promote or improve the economic, social, health and environmental well-being of the relevant area. And I think that was one of the most important comments in the consultation on the procurement bill. It's one that we would support fully and one that we would suggest should be embedded into the heart of procurement of all public bodies, not just the council. So we'd be making the same point to the NHS and to other public bodies. The third thing I want to say is, just following on from that, is that I am aware that some bodies have managed, despite the constraints of European legislation, to introduce clauses into their procurement processes which do maximise the benefit to the local economy in the way that the procurement bill suggested. And the one that I'm particularly familiar with is the Forestry Commission's new facility at Carrocktree, where they're building a £4 million visitor centre there. It's been procured through the SCAPE contract format. And that contract specifies that both labour and local spend by the contractor who won the contract, 20% of that must come from within 10 miles of the site. 40% must come within 20 miles and 75% within 40 miles. It also requires them to engage with SMEs such that at least 85% of the suppliers are SMEs and that 75% of the contract spend is made with SMEs. Now, that's a pretty rigorous set of constraints to place on a national contractor. As a result of that, they've subcontracted everything to local contractors. So 4B Construction have been doing the work. The electrician from Castle Douglas has been doing the work. In the last project that they completed, which is the David Marshall Lodge in Aberfeldy, using this format, they exceeded all of those targets. Now, to be able to do it in somewhere like Aberfeldy, where clearly there aren't that many construction businesses within 10 miles of where they're located, but to be able not just to meet that, but to beat those targets, I think sets a very good example. And it's certainly one that we would suggest the council would be, to look at. And I know every time I've talked about the importance of ensuring the local supply chain is maximised, we immediately come across this, but European rules don't allow it. The SCAPE contract is fully compliant with EU legislation, so we can do it. And I think that those two, if you like, the principle of that what we should be doing is using local procurement to ensure that we maximise our own assets, and that there is a mechanism there which allows us to do it. And I think that's a way, particularly given the state of our economy, the fact that we are, we were late to go into recession, but it looks as though we're going to be slow to come out, and that our wage levels are low, our job unemployment levels are low, something like 5 people chasing every vacancy locally. So the more we can keep public sector spending within the local economy, the better it is. I know that's something I'm preaching to the converted here, but I think there are ways that we can continue to develop that process. The other thing I wanted to mention, I noticed it was in your papers, is the relationship of the third sector and the role that plays in delivering goods and services, but principally services. And I speak also as a director of third sector first, which is something we have also discussed. And that is that, we believe very firmly that there is a role for and a growing use should be made of the third sector. It plays into our strengths, but it brings in a whole range of volunteering, of knowledge and of expertise that's very detailed and is hugely valuable. And very often the third sector are able to tap into that where people are prepared to volunteer. So the value for money issue is absolutely not in doubt. Now, and I know that the Council is moving towards, instead of providing grants to third sector organisations, to going through a contract procedure. And we have no problem with that. We understand the rationale that's driving that. But I think you need to be sensitive to what it is you are buying. And I really don't think that you can buy a partnership with a third sector organisation in the same way that you buy photocopiers. Third sector are not contractors. What you're looking to do is to create a partnership working, and a partnership which adds value, adds hugely to the value of what's being put in there. And therefore that needs to be done in a different way, but it still needs to have a competitive element in it. And we believe that we should be looking at, and I'm not coming here with a solution, I'm simply coming here to say I think there is some more work that has to be done in order to make sure that we create the kind of strong partnerships that we all want to see. And we think that there are ways and means of setting out contracts where what you do is you advertise for someone to provide a service without actually specifying to the level of detail that you would currently do. And what you're looking for essentially is to identify parties who have the capability of creating the partnership to deliver the service that you want. And there's the competitive element in it. People then have to bid in terms of what their skills, expertise and knowledge is. Then that would allow you to identify a preferred bidder. And you then negotiate the details of that partnership with them. And if at the end of that negotiation you're not satisfied that you're getting either the quality of partnership that you want or good value for money, then you can stop at that stage. But that allows the organisation, and very often these kind of partnerships, the knowledge about the service that you want to deliver sits with that group, that third sector group. And what you want to do is for that to be built into the whole process. And they may well have ways and things and ideas that could be suggested that you wouldn't have thought could have been delivered or could have been delivered for the money. That process, I think, would enrich the whole process. And above all, it would develop a partnership. And I think there are occasions where there are some of the third sector services, not necessarily all of them, there's some third sector services where that kind of partnership arrangement with a competitive element and a negotiated element to it would actually produce wins for everyone. So that's broadly the position I want to say. Sorry, the other thing I meant to say first is to recognise also the work that's been done by the Economic Development Service in terms of the Supplier Development Programme and also the other programmes. Because I think we have to recognise that any kind of public procurement process is a pretty daunting task for a small business. And for businesses to get themselves geared up to be able to fill in the tender and supply all the documentation and so on is a big ask. And I think the training courses that have been run have been well received and have been very successful in being able to let businesses know what they have to do. And in some cases, some of the businesses have decided, having been to that, this is not for them. And that's fine. But they've made that decision in the knowledge of the work that's been done. So we pay tribute to the work that's been done. We believe the local economy should be right at the top of our agenda in terms of local procurement. There are mechanisms which will allow you to specify the geographic spread of where it comes in the use of SMEs. And we also think that the whole approach towards procuring partnership working from the third sector, I think that needs to be reviewed.
Councillor Dykes, you wanted to raise a point in Gordon's sort of presentation there?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it's of particular interest. Obviously, as a council, every elected member of this council has brought to the table that they would like to see as much as possible when we come to procurement being procured locally, with the money coming back into the economy in Dumfries and Galloway. So obviously we're all on the same wavelength where that's concerned. You talked quite a lot about partnership working, and obviously the new government legislation is looking at more and more partnership working, and I think it would be the Cowie report, I think, that maybe discussed that a year or so ago, where they really wanted to move towards partnership working. You discussed a framework that you felt was good practice within that had been used within the Scottish forestry industry type scenario, and I also believe that Scottish Water have good practice as well, where they're looking at frameworks as well. Just wanted to know, from a chamber and FSB point of view, do you actually promote the lists of people that you have, the businesses that are listed with yourselves? Do you have an input into that? So you're talking about good practice from the forestry side. Now, obviously, both FSB and the Chamber of Commerce have members who have specialist fields. So do you promote a list of memberships when a big contract like that's coming off? I just wondered if you could answer that.
What we've been doing is encouraging businesses to go along to the training courses. We don't have the skills to be able to deliver that kind of training.
Good morning. I discovered when I was invited to come here.
What we also do is, for example, with the hospital, is that we have been, and with some of the wind farm developers, we have been stressing the importance of developing the local supply chain. And we were part of the renewables partnership, for example, which has agreed to set up a directory of businesses that are interested in dealing with wind farm developers, and in fact offered to set up that directory initially, but it's now going to be done on the Business Gateway website. So yes, we are keen to make the contacts between potential contractors and and local businesses.
Just to say that we do exactly the same as what Gordon. If we get a notification that we think would be of interest as a specific member or group of members, we send out notifications on a mass basis as well. And the renewable energy directory that they're compiling at the moment, that was sent out. And any notification, as I say, that we think will be of interest to members could make an interest, a benefit to them, we would send out en masse. So anything that you would like us to publicise to our members, we'd be pleased to send out.
Right, well, we'll have some questions, I think, that we'd like to sort of tease some answers out, see if there's anything we can do. So, Richard, I think you're leading off.
Thanks, Chair. It was the Forestry Commission contract seemed very interesting, and involving the third sector is always important, so I think we'll definitely look at those for you. Obviously, we're keen to involve as many local businesses in the procurement process and give them as much chance as possible to be involved. What more can the Council do to make local businesses aware of the things which we need to purchase?
Richard, if you can send me some details, or as soon as possible, when you know anything comes up along those lines, send it to me, and I will make sure our members, which, as I say, we've got about 1,000 business members in the area, so I'm sure a good proportion of those would be interested in perhaps tendering for any contracts that come along. So, as I say, the offer's there if you would like to contact me directly, and I will send out notification to our members.
Just one sort of follow-up on that. If we are doing that, what's the sort of time scale that benefits business? Because sometimes we're looking for a short time scale, other times longer to work in, because if it's a big job, you would expect a sort of longer lead-in so that the businesses could man up or whatever they need to do, make sure they've got the staff. So what sort of time scale are you looking for a good lead-in period for the local businesses?
Depending on the size of the possible contract, the longer the better, I would think, obviously, to allow for subcontraction contacts on the business's part. So as long as possible. But being an email system, we can send it out literally within a few days if something really comes up that you think needs urgent attention.
Councillor Crothers.
Thank you. Just on the back of the question that's been asked there, does the FSB proactively look on the council website and engage with the council in regards to different contracts and that are forthcoming?
No, that's not part of our remit. We don't do that. We will notify people, but we don't actively look for that.
Can I ask the same of Gordon, please?
Well, we've had a number of meetings with Rona discussing various issues. In fact, we had Liz Cameron, who's Chief Executive of Scottish Chambers, down to discuss it because of our interest in this whole issue. And I think, I mean, there's lots of things we can do to make communications can always be better, and we can always do things to improve that. But I think we have had a problem of convincing businesses that this is something that they want to do and need to do and invest in. And I think that's where things like right now the supplier development type programme has been the right thing to do. We've held a number of sessions as well where we have promoted the idea of the single Procurement Scotland website, and to get businesses to go in there and specify what they want, so they start to get automatic feeds of any tenders in the area of expertise that they have. And it's just keeping that drip feed of knowledge into the businesses to make sure that they do that. I think what we want to do is maybe take stock from this last round of training sessions that have been done, and just see whether, I know there's some feedback sheets have gone. I think what we want to do is talk to Shelley Bell and her in the work that she's been doing on that, to look at what's coming out of that. Where are the businesses seeing barriers and what's preventing them and what's concerning them with that, and then perhaps look to roll out some more specialised training to deal with those issues. And as clear, we're having the same kind of conversations with the NHS and with the wind farm developers as the major capital investments are taking place within the region.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the back of Councillor Carruthers' question, I think there's a bit of apathy out there within our local businesses, mainly down to the fact that they have attended numerous training sessions over the last X number of years, been given information, they've carried out to the letter what a request might be if they were wanted to be on the council tender list or otherwise, and then found out after it's cost them quite substantial amounts of money that actually they didn't need to do that in the first place, or that particular side of things or priorities fallen by the wayside, and they no longer need to be a member of an institution to actually be allowed to tender. And I could give an example of when you have to go through a prerequisite if you want to tender for construction, for example, and all businesses a number of years ago were told if they wished to do that and procure with the council that they would need to follow the construction online course, which a number of businesses did, and now that's all fallen by the wayside, and you actually don't need to do that. And you need to tender all over again, time and time again, depending on whatever contract comes up. And I think there's an issue there with the training courses that have taken place, and maybe the Chamber and FSB could actually discuss that type of thing with their members and try and encourage them to come back round the table to actually look at the new training sessions that have been put in place that have actually added a bit of value to the people who have taken part.
Sure, there's no doubt that we live in a changing world, and procurement above all has been a topic where conditions and processes and practices have changed and are continuing to change. And we have a job to do, I think, as business organisations, to try and make sure that we pick the right bits of information and get those out to our members. The marketing experts tell us that people don't see or understand a piece of information until they've heard it 7 times, which is quite a depressing thought. But there's no doubt there's a lot of noise out there, and it's very difficult sometimes to make sure you get the right bit of information to the right people. And something someone heard 4 or 5 years ago often sticks in the head in a way that doesn't. So we have a task to make sure that we do that. But we send out a weekly newsletter, every 10 days or so, newsletter that goes out to somewhere at 1,600 contacts, and we try and keep our website up to date and keep that. But we're also continually reviewing the events and training programs that we run. We run somewhere at 40 events and training programs a year, and to make sure that we target these kind of issues that come up, that we're hearing that people are not understanding or don't want to engage or whatever. That there is, I think what I'm saying is it is undoubtedly it's a two-way process here. It's not just us asking the council to be responsive to local business, but there is an obligation on local businesses to understand the constraints that the council operates under. And part of our task is to try and educate businesses and help them to understand that in order to be able to engage properly with the whole process.
Just to say that there are many businesses, feedback I get from is that they're disillusioned with the whole idea. They spend a lot of time, a lot of money trying to they abide by every rule, every possible precondition that the contract allows, and they get nowhere, and therefore they're totally disillusioned. So they've more or less abandoned the idea for public procurement. Possibly, if they know, the workshops that have been organised and the meetings, if we can get members to those, and possibly for them to be explained that it has changed, the procedures have changed, that could be a way forward, I think.
It's maybe an opportune time now. Colin, I think your question leads on because we're starting to move into how we can, the training events that run. Colin?
Thank you, Chair. The agreed question is written as something along the lines of that we run courses for local businesses, and these are being better attended with 47 businesses at Lockerbie last week. Do you think there's anything else in terms of training and equipping businesses for public procurement process we could do? That's the question as it was agreed we would ask. But on listening to you, and from my own experience and experience of people I know, a lot of people don't even bother going near the council to tender for work because it's just so complicated. I mean, the mere fact that we actually have to run training courses for people to tender for work would suggest that it is actually very complicated. People who have tried in the past and failed then pass that information on to others who say, it's not worth your while, mate, it's just a lot of red tape and you'll get nowhere. I mean, to me, I had a business for 35 years. I'd never ever dealt with the council purely because it was just easier not to. So I think the whole thing should be simplified to get more people involved in the process, and the word to be put out there that, they have simplified the process. And why, if you want to go and build a house for Mr. Smith, you agree to build a house, you get the plans drawn up, you get planning permission, and you build it. You don't need to go through a training programme to do all that. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on what I've just said, basically?
I'd fully back what you say, Colin. It's exactly the attitude. And some companies, local companies, feel that there's an inner circle of companies who will get the contract, doesn't matter what they do. And it's just, as you say, as Councillor Dyke said, it's an apathy, a feeling of apathy. You think, well, there's no point in me tendering for this. It's going to cost me a lot of money. It's going to take a lot of time. What's the point?
Yeah, all for simplifying processes, but I think we've got to recognise that we live in a litigious world, and public sector bodies are probably more exposed to that than individuals. Therefore, inevitably there needs to be a level of bureaucracy that surrounds any contracting. I think the moves towards a single one-off PQQ is a good measure. That will hopefully reduce some of the mind-numbing repetition that you have to go through, putting the same information, putting your accounts in, all the rest of that. All of that kind of thing being done time after time. But I think there has to be a level of bureaucracy. Now, some of that bureaucracy is about asking the company if they have policies like equal opportunities and whatever. Those are things that companies should actually have. And certainly, if they're members of the Chamber or indeed the FSB, part of that membership includes an HR service. So to get that policy in place takes about 10 minutes to actually download it. But very often companies don't produce, very small companies start to employ, they haven't got handbooks. Part of this process, I think, is to help those businesses get themselves to a position where they ought to be in terms of their documentation. So I think we have to accept that because we're dealing with the public sector, then there will be a complexity and a bureaucracy that surrounds that. And part of the process has to be to demystify that to the businesses. Because when you actually look at an invitation to tender and there's screeds and screeds and screeds of it, the actual bits that really matter, are actually quite small. And it's those key questions that you're really concentrating on answering. And that's about the job that you already do, and you should be able to answer those questions. So I think, as I say, it's a two-way process. Yes, please, let's see as much simplification, standardisation as we can in terms of public sector procurement. But yes, there is an obligation on us to help businesses demystify that process, provide the confidence, and if we then start to see more businesses winning the tender, then the better it's going to be. We'll get into a virtuous cycle where businesses, once they've done it, got the skills, got the confidence, then they go on and do more. So I think sitting back and saying, can't be done, don't want to do it, too complicated, I think is the wrong kind of approach, particularly where, we're seeing our economy suffer. Russell Brown recently pointed out that the private sector is not increasing jobs in Dumfries and Galloway to the same extent that's happening across the borders. Now, why is that? Now, I think this is part of that process, that we've got to make sure that what money is being invested locally is invested with local companies. So we've got an obligation, I think, to make the system work and make it work better.
Yeah, it's just, you obviously think it's perceived as being more complicated than what it actually is. And how can we actually combat that? How can we get the message across to the one and two man band companies that could actually end up getting part of a job? How do we get it across to them that it's actually worthwhile going into the process in the first place?
It's just without any clear evidence that companies are getting contracts. And at the moment, there's very little evidence taking a straw poll, there's very little evidence that local companies are getting these jobs.
A number of our members have been increasing the amount of public sector work that they've been doing and are becoming ambassadors for encouraging others to go down that route. But it is a complex process. Let's try and see it simplified. But I think we have an obligation as a business organisation to try and help businesses through that process of demystifying, encouraging them, and trying to make sure that we make the best of this.
I've got Ian, then Jane, then Jill.
Thanks. It's got to be picking on a similar point. Something that the council's done in the past when they're looking at larger contracts, council themselves have actually bid through a corporate part of the organisation. They've bid in, achieved to gain the contract. Say it's a couple of £1 million worth of contract. Then out of that, once they've got the contract, they've actually went out and sourced local small, medium-sized enterprise companies, and that's how they've pretty much fulfilled that contract. Use some of the council work, but mostly through small businesses out with. Now, I think that's been a very good way of getting local contractors, are best affected small businesses through the council's procurement process, and that's one of the ways I think they've got over it in the past. I just wonder what yourselves would think of that process should the council pick up that as a natural standard procurement method, bidding into larger contracts, but then bringing in themselves, picking up on the 1, 2, 5, 6 men organisations, or just because it is bureaucratic. I've been in business for 14 years myself, and similar to Colin, I never ever considered looking at a council contract because of the complications and the small amount of, only the most ever I employed was 14, anywhere between 2 and 14 men at any one time. So I never ever considered, there wasn't enough. If to spend 3, 4, 5 days on a contract and lose out, that's it. You do it once, maybe twice, and you never do it again.
Sorry, I bring it back through consortium bidding, getting businesses to work together to split up a contract between themselves. I think that's something that we're not good at doing, and we need to encourage businesses to do that. But that needs a bit of networking. It needs people to start to build relationships and build trust between each other. The other element to this is I think it's important every time the council has a large contract they're putting out, that you look at it and say, could this be split into smaller sections?
You mean the consortium through the private sector? Fantastic if that could work. What I was actually talking about was the council as a facilitator, or actually being that consortium, so to speak. We've got the manpower, we've got the knowledge, and we've done it in the past. What would the private sector think of that as a philosophy of the council going forward? The actual, again, the council would be that consortium rather than the private sector. If we get the private sector to do it even better, but it hasn't been working in the past.
I have to say my initial reaction to it is one of a marked lack of enthusiasm. I think it's important that we encourage business, and it's also who is the customer and who's buying and who's selling, and it's important. This whole process works on the basis that there is someone buying and someone selling, and once you start to mix those too much, you're in difficult ground. But I do think there is scope for us to encourage businesses to cluster and to try and work together. But that is difficult because, businesses naturally are competitive and they see the business down the road as a competitor, not as a collaborator. And how we break that down, I'm not sure. But certainly, one of the things we do constantly is networking to get people to talk to each other. And once they start talking to each other and understand, well, you actually don't do quite the same, but what we do fits, then you'll start to build alliances that may well start to be able to bid in for it. But I don't think you could go out and say the council will now create this consortium who will then bid. And because there'll also be an expectation if you're involved in setting that consortium up, that they're going to get the contract.
Jane.
I think we're straying naturally into the next section of questioning, so I'll leave it.
Jill.
Thank you. I'm not sure, but I think Councillor Carruthers was probably meaning that if we had a planning, housing and environment contract and we were putting that out, commissioning the work, we would use DG first to commission that work, therefore allowing the contract possibly to be split into smaller bite-sized chunks that therefore don't fall foul of the European procurement laws and allows for smaller companies within Dumfries and Galloway to tender into that process and actually gain that work and keep people gainfully employed within Dumfries and Galloway and bringing the money back in to our own economy. And I think that's what he was, I think, am I right? At least that's the way I took it.
I don't have a problem with that at all.
Okay, thank you, because I think it's important that we understand that you're not actually saying that's not what you would like to see happening, because obviously it's been recorded and that would be what I would have taken out of Councillor Carruthers' question.
Jill, do you want to ask the next sort of line of questioning?
It was really just surrounding joint working. And, obviously, the council needs to do everything it can to continue to carry out good joint working practices with yourselves, both the Chamber and FSB. And it was to see what additional fields you thought the council could actually look at to make sure that joint working was moving forward in the right direction. and actually giving best practice and therefore best opportunities to local businesses.
I think essentially that's some of the points I was trying to make at the beginning. I think there are, we need to continue to work on this, the local element, developing and supporting the local supply chain. And secondly, I think we need to look again at the whole issue about partnerships and how they are procured.
Could I ask, well, just in the development of this local supply chain, I spent just a few minutes looking at the Southwest Hub website, and clearly there is a notion that there should be a development of a local supply chain as a result of the work they do. And I would be interested to know whether you are seeing that develop, whether there's anything that we can do ourselves to help that from your point of view, and because it's a question of assisting local businesses to bid for these contracts. Are you seeing anything on the ground at the moment? Are your members seeing something concrete?
Chair, I think there are a number of companies in this region have viewed the establishment of the hub with a degree of concern, and that the whole use of these types of contracting seems inevitably to bring companies in from outside rather than locally. And we've seen term contracts and all sorts of things being introduced throughout the NHS, which has resulted in that. As a result of that, as soon as the hub was announced, we made contact with them, and we've had a number of meetings with them. And we have received the reassurances that you see on the website that they are very keen to stress that their whole approach is to maximise the use of the local supply chain. And they talk about trying to procure 70–80% from the local supply chain, to which we said, that's absolutely fine. Come back next year and tell us what you've actually done. And certainly we would think one of our tasks is to hold them to account, to demonstrate that they're able to achieve that. Now, the contracts they're working on just now are contracts they've inherited. So it's a bit early to say that the Dunsker Health Centre, for example, I think was on the go before the hub came in. So I think we want to monitor that and continue to address every year and ask them to give us an account. The Forestry Commission gave me figures for exactly how much they had procured in terms of each of those key performance indicators, and they can do it for every contract. So I would expect the hub to be able to do exactly the same. So we should get that kind of transparency and reporting that they have achieved it. I think similarly, and obviously the hospital contract is not part of the hub, it's part of a separate contract process. And certainly those bidders that we've been able to engage with are saying the same things to us. And that's very encouraging. Although the problem with the hospital, I think, is the scale of what's being proposed is so great at a time when the construction industry is at such a low ebb, whether we have the capacity locally to be able to respond to that. I mean, the hospital will need 1,200 people building it at peak. Now, given that the college is reporting that the construction courses over the last 2 years have been hugely undersubscribed, and the number of students coming through is at its lowest point for a very long time. So we're ill-equipped to deal with that kind of boom. And the net effect of that is that inevitably it will simply pull labour in from around the area. So certainly we've been talking to them about what mechanism can be done. And I know the Council's Economic Development Department have been looking at how do we make sure that we are ready in 18 months or 2 years' time to maximise the impact of that contract. But all of these, I have to put my cards on the table and say design and build contracts are not my favourite way of doing things. And I find it difficult to understand how, and if I go back to the example I gave of the Forestry Commission, the contract is with Robertson Construction, but it's being built by 4B and local contractors. My simple question is, why didn't we just go to the local contractors and just cut out that other layer? They're all making a profit on this. And I struggle sometimes that we set up processes and procedures in order to procure things to get best value for money, and yet we end up with a much more complex supply chain than we had before.
George?
Thanks. Yeah, I think maybe Gordon has actually maybe answered part of the question, which I have got written down here about the question 6 about the South West Hub, which is responsible for procuring large capital projects in the area for the NHS and our new school at Dalbeattie, and Scotland Excel, who do all the large commodity contracts on behalf of the council. You know, is there anything you'd really like to add to what you've just been saying, Gordon? It's just, I know the question is coming out of order on this sheet, but it seemed at the appropriate time maybe to ask it.
Apologise. I think the two Ronnies had a skit where someone asked the question that hadn't been asked, answered the question that hadn't been asked. So I apologise for that. No, I have a concern about these kind of national processes and big organisations involving that, because if these big organisations are bidding for these contracts, I mean, what is it, 3-4 companies bidding for the hospital contract. 3 of them are going to be unsuccessful. All 3 of them have put a huge amount of effort into designing it and demonstrating how they would procure it. So they've spent probably millions of pounds on that process. And if that's lost, then they have to recoup that when they win a contract. So I really struggle sometimes to understand what we're doing at a national level with these sort of big contracts.
Jill?
Sorry, I think I was going to ask something on the back of Councillor Maitland, but it was probably surrounding, what, if anything, it was that you wanted us to ask. The hub in particular surrounding the supply chain, because I think you talked about framework at the beginning, and you've talked a lot about the Forestry Commission and their framework, and I know that Scottish Water have also introduced a framework where they look in particular, it's very, very similar, where they have the local locus, if you want to class it as that, and then they procure from within the radius moving out. So therefore, if they win if Scottish Water are doing a contract in Stewartry, for example, then they would have a list of contractors that had gone through their framework and that could be asked to carry out work on behalf of their main contractor, and their main contractor have got to ask these companies to do the work. It's part of the framework. And I think that's what you were discussing just now about the Forestry Commission with their framework. And I think Councillor Maitland's quite right, because I pass Dunsker Surgery site every day in life. And I know from what I see on that site, there are companies there that are out with Dumfries and Galloway. Now, if we want to keep everything in the supply chain, we need to have something in place that actually says that they've got to work, if they're awarded the contract, then they have got to choose suppliers, if possible, because it may be that they can't get what they're looking for within the immediate locus. But if they can, then they should be using Dumfries and Galloway-based companies to actually carry out that work. And we've seen it all over. It's not just here, it's everywhere else as well. And you're quite right about large construction companies, or companies, it doesn't need to be construction, but large companies bringing in people from out with whatever region they've won the contract in to carry out the work, because they're the companies they often deal with. But if the supply chain's to be looked at properly, and we are trying to keep it as much as we can in Dumfries and Galloway, then it's vitally important that we make sure there's something in that framework. Because if it's not there, nobody needs to comply with it.
If I could suggest, I think we should all continue to press the hub to say we want annual reports, and we want those reports on what they have procured locally, number of SMEs, how much they've procured within 10 miles. I think the SCAPE format is quite a good one, because 10, 20 and 40 recognises that you're not going to get everything locally, and if you've got a building that needs a lift, there isn't anyone locally who can do that. you have to bring in a specialist contractor. But the local guys can build the brick shaft. They just can't do the specialised work. And I think the point you make about local people are watching this. You know, not only you drive past that, but other people do. They see the vans, they see where people are coming, and very quickly they start to form a view on what is the public sector doing with our money and why they're not supporting local businesses. And the other side of that coin is a local business has a vested interest in making sure the product they produce is of good quality. Now, the probability is it's their children that are going to go to that health centre, and they have that interest that a contractor from miles away who wants to come in, do the job, and move on, doesn't. So I think from the authorities' point of view, putting in the kind of rings and targets for the contractor to procure, I think is a good mechanism, and I would hope that we could ask the hub to do something like that. If they are saying we're going to procure 70% locally, then that, I think, is a pretty good and well accepted mechanism for doing this.
Just very quickly, it was just to say that there are a lot of local contractors on that site, but they're not all local contractors, is all I'm saying. So if we want to keep the supply chain locally, then we need to do something about it.
Jane?
It's just a factual follow-up, if I could, please, and it's a question to Rona. Rona, our standing orders for procurement, which we did, a year and a half ago, something like that, I've got in the back of my mind that that we don't permit main contractors to subcontract without coming back to ask us. Is that right? I've got something in there talks about subcontracting and requiring permission, but I'm not sure.
I think it's probably moved over to our standard terms and conditions, and it tends to be what we do now is in pre-qualification, we actually ask the main contractor who their subcontractors are going to be, and then obviously at that point sometimes they can't tell us because they've still to go out and get pricing. But on the whole, we have always had the view that yes, if they're not identified when they're tendering, they should come back to us and seek permission for those. How strongly we enforce that, I'm not sure. But
Colin?
Thank you, Chair. It's just looking at this from a sort of different perspective. I know the Mayor's Croft house build at Kirkcudbright, just 36 houses getting built down there. Joinery work is being done by local joiners. Now they're headed up by a guy who only employs a couple of men, but he seems to have pulled in other small one-man band, two-man band people in to do that job. Now, I asked a couple of local joiners, did they get involved in the tender process? And their answer was, oh, I'm not working for that kind of money. These guys are working for a little more than minimum wage. I think a lot of tradesmen are used to getting a certain amount of money and they just won't want to tender for something at a lot less than what they can get working privately. So, I mean, I just wonder the problem of the Hub or any other organisation trying to bring in local businesses. If these guys are used to getting 25, 30 quid an hour working, for private individuals, they won't want to come in at a kind of rate that would win them a big job. I mean, I just wonder what your thoughts were on that side of the coin.
I think if someone is making a good living, then fine, good on them. I think the more fundamental issue there is about the availability of skills for our businesses to be able to recruit staff and people who are able to deliver the right quality of work. And because, as I said earlier, we've had this, construction has been the one sector of the economy right across the country that has probably suffered the brunt of the recession. And as a result of that, the number of skilled people there has dropped. Many businesses have let them go. There's a lot more white vans running around now than there used to be, where people have been paid off and they've set themselves up in business. Now, whether we see an upturn, whether these people will come back in, or whether we can encourage young people to see construction as a career, I think those are the challenges for us and how we organise this. And I think there needs to be a discussion with the hub and with the contractors for the hospital and with the council involved about how we plan for the future for our skills.
Patsy, would you?
I thought originally you'd answered part of the question I'm going to ask you, but I think it's changed a bit in the discussion we've just had. My question is that do you think you as the Chamber and the FSB have a role to play in encouraging small businesses to work together? And you used the word cluster, which is the same idea. And by doing that, to form a consortium that will allow you to bid for larger contracts. Is that a job that you see you should be doing for your members?
Quite honestly, I don't think it is, because it could cause conflict of interest between members. If we select certain plumbers or join us to work together, others may say, well, why are they getting in and we're not? So it's a thing we really don't want to get into.
I partially agree with that. It's not for us to select the businesses, but I think it is for us to encourage the businesses to get together, to facilitate that, to let them talk. But at the end of the day, the businesses that group together need to be businesses that like each other, get on, trust each other. And that's a relationship that they have to form themselves. But I think, yes, we have a duty, I think, to, if we're clear that that is the way in which we will continue to increase the proportion of local procurement that the public sector is able to achieve, and the only way to do it is by going down the route, or drive that further, by going down the route of encouraging clusters and relationships between businesses, then I think we should be there encouraging it up to a point. But once they get in the room, we walk out.
Thank you. Just as far as clusters, consortiums, have you got any ideas what a best practice would be for that? Because you're encouraging it, especially yourself, Gordon, in particular. What do you see as a working example, something that would work and be sustainable?
I don't know. It's a simple answer. I don't have. It's not something that we've given a huge amount of thought to. But I think if that's an action for us that comes out of this, we'd be happy to go and look at it and talk to some of the businesses involved. Just see what the response is. See whether there's a buy-in to the idea, and then see how we take it from there.
I'll just reiterate, just saying the FSB I don't think would be interested in that, really. It's independent traders, like, keep it that way. If they want to get together, entirely up to them. But it wouldn't be underneath the umbrella of the FSB.
Jane?
It was just absolute to follow that up, to ask whether we might have examples if through the Chamber of Commerce networks, whether there's been any success that we know of elsewhere that we could then say this has worked and show that it has worked. I agree. It's about good relationships, and that people are very often saying, "What's my competitor doing?" But if we can demonstrate that it has worked somewhere else, that might be useful.
Actually, I think it does work in Dumfries and Galloway. If you look outside in Dumfries and Galloway in construction sites, for example, you often get Dumfries and Galloway companies working together. Somebody's won the contract. They maybe don't have enough men to do that particular job, so they bring in their competitors, if you want to class them as competitors, but they work together as well. You see it all over the place in Dumfries and Galloway. They actually do work together. I mean, I think it's different to actually going out and all being part of a tendering process for a piece of work. But if one of them actually gets the piece of work, then they bring in others to actually carry it out. So the hospital situation that you were talking about, and whether or not there would be enough workers to do that. I mean, it's the same, if you're building the Aberdeen bypass and somebody wins the main contract, they bring people in to actually carry out the work. I mean, these companies do work together. I think it's important that we're not misled about that, because they do. Across the whole of Dumfries and Galloway, a lot of companies work together.
No, the principle's absolutely fine. I know lots of companies that do work together. But as I say, if a business organisation tries to organise that, group them together, it may cause problems.
It just at that particular point, because I think Jill's absolutely right with what she's saying in practice. But I would just as far as the question is concerned, a bidding consortium is what I'm thinking of, or cluster, and that's what I think is being alluded to, a consortium that can go in and bid for contracts, tenders and so on, and possibly win, but using a lot of local contractors.
Side of it that was the part of the question, and that's obviously something you are not getting involved in, which is fine. My next question is, what do you think we, as the council, should be doing to encourage medium and large businesses to be involved in public sector procurement?
Okay, quite honestly, I don't know. I don't think Gordon would probably know either. I think the only way really would be to ask our members and find out what they see as the stumbling blocks. And if you wish, we could put together a small survey, send it round to our members, and find out what they think. They are, after all, at the front end of it. We only get feedback if there's disappointments or sometimes elation if they do get a contract. But really, it's up to the company to tell us what the problems are, and to tell the council what the problems are. How do we do that? Possibly we survey around about and see what response you get. If you wanted to put one together, maybe on the Survey Monkey or something along those lines, we'd send it out for you, see what response you get.
Just on that, one of the questions might be if you could ask your members who have bidded in but didn't win, do they actually ask for follow-up to see where, what wasn't right? If it's simply priced, well, then they know that. But if there's something else, it might be something. And then we could maybe pick up something that's of an issue that we could possibly look to train them or help in the future.
Absolutely right. Well, as I say, if we want to get together, we'll put a survey together and see what the response is. And that would be one of the questions. That would give you the fairest idea of what people actually think of the process at the moment.
Can I just ask Lorna what she would see as that way, as a good way forward for us? Because the next question I have here is for you is what one thing could we do that would make the biggest difference to your members? So that could be part of that survey, because you probably don't know at the moment. There you are. So just wonder, Lorna, what you think of that as an idea.
I think that's one of the actions members want to take forward as part of their evidence gathering. I think it's a very valuable suggestion, and we could discuss it more broadly with the other organisations. Then we could help construct that, test it with the organisations and yourselves, and do that as part of your evidence gathering for this review.
Just, I've heard Gordon talk about this before, and I think maybe Rowan as well. It's something you haven't touched on today, and that's the local economic development plan or your regional economic strategy, and that can potentially bring in local, if we word that or have it constructed in the right manner, that can bring in local contracts as well. I don't know if, I'm sorry, I apologise, I'm picking on Gordon here, but I know I've heard him speaking out about it before, and I know you've got knowledge on it. So, I mean, I think we spoke about it when Liz was down that time. So,
well, the current economic strategy expires this year, and I think work is now underway to bring a new one. And I would certainly like to see that brought forward, because what that can do is kind of set the context and set the public policy framework that allows you to operate in terms of your procurement policies, because it provides the rationale as to why the council needs to do this. And you don't need to look too far in terms of the statistics about our local economy to find a very powerful argument for developing the local supply chain as much as we can. So I think it has an important part to play. And can I say, we're happy to put out questionnaires as well. To be perfectly honest, the kind of comments we're hearing just now about procurement relate more to other capital projects rather than to the councils. And certainly some of the way in which some of the wind farm developments are being tendered and subcontracted, and the almost exclusive Irish element in that is giving some concern. Much more so than people talking about don't want to deal with the council because of the way they do it. And I think that reflects the changes that have been taking place. There are a number of very specific things that we could talk to Rona about in terms of how contracts are put out, particularly in construction. That small businesses here, for example, in construction much prefer to have a bill of quantities rather than a drawing and have to take the quantities off. And I know there was one contract that was put out recently, and that way, inevitably, it was won by a company outside that has those resources to do that, and the local contractor don't have it. So I think we need to be constantly focusing on what are the specific issues for our businesses, and therefore how do we set up contracts that will give you a competitive position, but will allow the locals to compete on a level playing field.
If there's no further questions, go to recommendations. We've received presentations and we've considered the information and evidence this provides for the committee's review on procurement and commissioning. Is there any highlights that you wanted to bring out that we've captured that we'll take forward?
I think there's a number of areas of particular detail that the committee will wish to look at, but I think there's 3 or 4 areas of particular interest, I think, that picked up by members. One, the example of the escape contract. I think that's the description of it and how that might have delivered in terms of local supply chain. And that might be an area members want to go and have a look at in terms of how that contract was constructed, and I'm sure colleagues in the Forestry Commission would support us in having that discussion. There was also some areas of the effectiveness of the training and its visibility, maybe around suppliers. There was a discussion there and an offer, and I'm sure members would like to take that up, around contacting businesses directly and getting their views through a survey as part of your evidence gathering. And there was a number of areas here, and I think in both in the answers that we received and indeed the opening remarks, around some of the intent and the work that's already underway in the area and some of the opportunities under the new legislation that's coming through. So they might be areas members wish to find out a bit more out in terms of your evidence sessions for this piece of work going forward. So this will be captured in the attachments to the minute, and a full transcript of this for you to consider as part of your evidence.
I'll get Gordon first, and then I'll bring in Jill and George.
Just to say that the specific issue about the third sector and partnership working, I would hope that that's also on that agenda.
Right. Jill, then George.
Thank you, Chair. It was just in particular to what Lauren has just said, when we looked at examples, in particular of the escape contract, I also, from the Forestry Commission, and maybe taking some evidence from the Forestry Commission, I would also like to look at the Scottish Water Framework as well, which is very specific to local areas, and I think it's important that we look at both the frameworks. So I would like the Scottish Water Framework added in as well.
George.
Chair, just in the back of what Gordon was saying about wind farm developments and how we maybe should be worrying more about the procurement in that sector than in the public sector, you know, like the hospital. I would like something written down about, you know, we're showing concern, because I hear it all the time up in the Glen Kens and the Upper Stewartry about how, you know, there's absolutely nothing is coming the contractor's way within these areas, you know, builders and various other people. They're getting absolutely nothing out of the building of these wind farms. I would just like something said about that, maybe.
Just to clarify, I'm almost summarising, but the notes will capture everything that's been said today, so I'm just trying to sort of pick out the salient points and appreciate the third sector and indeed those points as well. But it'll all be included for your next sort of considerations.
Jane.
If you'd indulge me, I think this has been actually a really interesting and wide-ranging discussion. Brian picked up on something, and I mean, it's hanging it on Patsy's question, which is about making a difference to people. Brian used the expression, and I slightly sort of wince, that people believe there is an inner circle of businesses which win contracts. I think that was your thinking. Now, you know, it's up to us to be absolutely clear that that's not happening. And I think from the point of view of the council, what we actually have in our control, and I think it's important that there is an understanding of the standing orders. I think it's also quite interesting that we ought to enforce them. If there are parts in there that we've agreed and we are not actually enforcing, there is an issue, I think, with respect to contracts up to a certain level. You know, the contracts go up in stages in terms of value, and at a certain level, I think it's up to officers simply to seek out 3 competitive quotes. Now, you know, on the back of what Brian is suggesting, I think people would want to know who those 3 are and how they're chosen and whether they are constantly the same 3 or how it works. And I think that we ought to have that monitored. I'd be very interested to hear just very quickly whether that happens or whether we can get that information out to the members of Brian's organisation.
No, I'd be very happy to do that. I mean, I think we've got good information about the total number of local contractors that are actually involved, and I think that will show that it's not the same few all the time. In addition, I know there was an internal audit report not that many months ago who did just really went in and randomly looked at a number of contracts in every single department in the council just to make sure that standing orders were being followed, and also that allegations, there was a particular allegation about one area always going to the same 2 or 3 people. So, you know, I hope we can allay any concerns about that. And certainly I would encourage any businesses who do want a chance to tender, you know, that we can point them in the direction of the person in the department who would be putting out those tenders and allow them an opportunity to bid. That's always there, and I'll make sure that that happens.
Just to point out, that's not my personal feeling. It's just I'm reflecting the feeling that we get the feedback from our members, and that's, I've heard that said 2 or 3 times, that they feel there's little point in bidding because X, Y company is going to get it. That's the feedback we're getting.
Thanks, Chair. And I've just one more comment, but I think if there is that perception, as Councillor Maitland said, you know, perception is a very important thing, and we want to make sure that we get the information out there and it's accurate. Thank you.
With that, are members happy that we've considered the information? Yeah. Right, so can I take this opportunity to thank you, gentlemen, for coming along and giving us that input that will help us in our deliberations when we look at the review in the future. So thank you for that. Whilst we're sort of waiting on the next person coming in, it was sort of a tentative agreement that we would look for a date in December to actually have another committee. And what we have in a tentative date of the 17th of December 2013 at 2 p.m. There's no invites out yet, but 17th of December.
I think it's a Tuesday.
Members happy to consider that? Um, 2 p.m. I'm going to leave you in Councillor Brodie's hands. I have to go back to the doctor today, so I'll leave yous and love yous. Right.
Okay, members, we're now going to receive a presentation from Hub Southwest Scotland, and we've got Bill Martin and Michael McBrearty here to give us a little presentation, then we've got some questions for you.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks very much for giving us this opportunity to come along and speak to you. We've been listening with interest through next door in terms of the stuff you've been talking about, and hopefully what we're going to say will actually help answer a lot of those questions, or at least give you a vehicle by which you can answer all those questions. And I think it does. A couple of things up front. Well, I'm Bill Martin. I'm the public side of Hub. I'm actually worked for over 30 years in the public sector and procurement. I'm currently employed by NHS Dumfries and Galloway, but funded by the Scottish Government to sit within the Hub vehicle and look after public sector interest, help the Hub grow and represent you guys who are the participants. One of the big things that attracted me to the Hub model was the focus on community benefits, the focus on SMEs, the focus on apprentices, trainees, employment in local areas, and basically turning that investment into benefits to local communities. And hopefully through some of the stuff, particularly what Michael's going to talk about, around the supply chain engagement and also around what we call the Skills Academy, will actually hopefully make you feel more comfortable around using the Hub model. As you know, we're currently engaged with your education colleagues around the Dalbeattie School, potentially going on to the Dumfries Learning Town as well. And we've got a bit of activity in the health centres too. I'm not quite clear how much people in here know about the Hub, but Dumfries and Galloway Council are a shareholder in Hub. Hub isn't a private sector company. It's a public-private partnership there for 25 years. I was looking after the team when we went through a no-due process to appoint Michael and his colleagues to become the private side of the business, in which there was D&G representation on that. So we've been through that no-due process. What that then actually does is it releases us from a lot of the rules and regulations around public procurement. Because in engaging with Southwest Hub, you've already went through that process, and then Hub would engage with supply chain further down the line in a private sort of relationship. And Michael, if there's any questions around that, but what it does do, it certainly eases the process and makes things easier around the appointment and engagement with local suppliers, local employees, local workforce, and all these sort of things that I think, well, we certainly agree with the sort of stuff you've been speaking at this morning. You're not here to deliver projects. You're here now these days to deliver a project with all the efficiencies, all the quality, but it's all the additionality around local benefits. And as I say, that's what attracted me to Hub. And basically, that's what Hub's all about in terms of community-led change. It's about the sort of stuff I talked about community growth. If we come and deliver a project and walk away, and there's nothing left behind, there's nothing left in terms of community improvements, and I think we failed. And that's a big part of our appointment process in terms of who actually gets business through Hub, in terms of what they'll bring to local communities. I could say these things and you could say, yeah, great, I agree with that, but let's see, and I think we heard earlier about discussion around, well, let's see where you are a year down the line. We are a year down the line, and Michael again will touch on some of the stuff that I think we're delivering. I think we certainly are more efficient. We don't have to go through, we've got very, very, very fast appointment processes. We're very conscious of the fact that local businesses maybe aren't up to doing detailed PQQs, or maybe, they've not got the overhead other bigger companies have. So we need to find an answer to that. And I think we've got an answer to that. So, but more importantly around Hub is the opportunity, as we see a bigger challenge, and I know possibly it's not something that you're focused on in this forum, but the challenge around getting the public sector to work closer together so that we bring general benefits. So for instance, if you're employing trainees, apprenticeships, we can bring them on in a D&G job, and then we can transfer them to complete their apprenticeships on an NHS job, because we have that flexibility, because we can work across the sector also has all the other aspects that you're looking for, what I see in a good public-private partnership around the opportunity to work with the private sector, a good private sector company that brings a different skill to the party that can actually supplement and work with the public sector skill. And I think that's what these guys do, Michael and his team does. So just in terms of what South West Hub is, South West Hub takes into account, it's the green area there, it's Dumfries and Galloway, the 3 Ayrshires and Lanarkshire. So it's quite a big area. It's a population of approximately a million population. And that's what the 5 hub territories in Scotland all consist of. But so it's a really good blend of kind of sort of urban areas as well as the sort of more rural areas such as down here in Ayrshire. And that presents certain challenges, but I think it presents really good opportunities as well. That's our objectives. I mean, that's what we will deliver. We've got very, very clear and measurable KPIs around that. The big challenge there is around, we're only a year in, we've got 3 or 4 jobs in sight, and Michael will get into more detail on them. And it's when you start hitting the site, you've got that ability to put out packages of work to the local supply chain, then you'll see more of these benefits around, community benefits, around increased employment and all that sort of stuff. But you can see what the hub is. I mean, it's a totally different approach to procurement, I see anyway, and that's what attracted me to it, because it's not about delivering a project, it's all about, well, what else can you do? And almost every line there talks about continuous improvement, talks about local, it uses the word community, it talks about collaboration, it talks about public sector working together, so it is something totally different. And I think, and I can understand why local businesses and potentially participants who don't quite understand it can feel a bit threatened by it. But certainly, and maybe it's easy for me because I understand it more, but I'm from the public sector and I actually see this as a massive opportunity to make improvements in communities. And I suppose through this and what we're hoping for and what I'm hoping for this, we've had terrific engagement up to now with D&G Council around the education side, and we've got a plan to go and speak to DG First as well in terms of how we can engage with them and involve them in other projects, anything that we can actually help to sort of support the local workforce. So I suppose what I'm looking for is the opportunity to engage further with you guys around even your master planning and all this sort of stuff, where we can actually provide maybe more skill and experience here, but certainly give assistance wherever we can. In terms of what we ended up with, so we went through a year's procurement in terms of OJU. We did the usual PQQ stuff. There was a working party made up of representatives of all the participants in Hub, and this is what we ended up with. Scottish Futures Trust owned 10% of it. The participants, we've got 15 participants, and the next slide shows who they are. 12 of them are shareholders, as I said, including you guys. And then the other 60%, the successful bidder in this case was Alliance Community Partnerships. Michael's the general manager of Hub, and he'll be able to tell you a bit more about Alliance Community Partnerships if need be. But as far as we're concerned at the moment, they don't exist. What exists now is Hub South West Scotland, and that's who you would be engaging with, or that's who you do engage with. So here, that's the participants as they stand at the moment. There's all the councils are in there. We've got all the NHS bodies. We've got the police, the fire. We've got Avonbury Regeneration. So it's a fairly broad range of kind of participants. Say 12 of them are shareholders. Some of the special boards in the NHS aren't able to be shareholders in companies, but all the other NHS bodies are. And the only other one that isn't a shareholder is South Lanarkshire. So a good, and these guys meet every 2 months, and I report to them in a territory partnering board every 2 months, and they are responsible for the management and performance of HubCo. So you're continually getting that input as a private sector partner in terms of performance. In terms of Alliance Community Partnerships, it's important you understand what that is. And it's important because when we were going through this procurement, we didn't want And we were quite clear in this, the working group were quite clear in this. We didn't want a big contractor sitting at the top table, sitting on the board. That's happened in a number of other hubcos. Not necessarily because they would be there to take all the work away, but because there is a perception there. There would be a perception that that is what might happen. At the top table, in terms of the hubco board, the board is made up of a public sector director, who currently is Craig Marriott of the NHS. There's a director from Scottish Future Trust, John Hope, and the other 3 directors, and that's the relationship. It's got to be more private than public. That allows us flexibility in procurement through hubco. The other 3 directors are from Equitex. Equitex are a funding company. They don't have any interest in construction companies, who does work, who carries out work. They're basically there to make sure hubco is a success and delivers a return on any investments that they raise for the large DBFM type projects, or revenue funded projects. A lot of their finance actually that they raise and a lot of their investments are actually from public sector pension funds. So it's actually quite a good arrangement, and that was a big attraction for us. Now, I've put in Keir, Graham and Gallagher Try there because I'm sure people around the table are aware that these are main players in hubco. These are the investment arms of these 3 companies. They don't have a seat on the board. They are there because when it comes down to investing in a large revenue funded project, they have the opportunity to put in a certain percentage of money to get a return on that money. As I say, Michael will talk more about how contractors, etc., are appointed off what we call the tertiary supply network, and he'll talk more about how Keir's, Graham's and Gallagher are actually bidding for work and others. But I just wanted to make that clear that from the public sector side, I and my colleagues were very keen that we didn't have any of these guys at the top table, and that's how it's turned out. So in terms of what we actually do, what does hubco do? So we've got this arrangement now. There's 6 or 7 of us sitting in an office in North Ayrshire Council offices at the moment, which we lease off North Ayrshire Council. And what do we actually do? There's 3 strands to the work that hubco can do. There's ongoing partnering services. Now that's basically where we develop the programme going forward. We work with participants. We develop our supply chain network. I know you've had a lot of discussion about that this morning, how that's actually going to be set up, how it's going to actually respond to the objectives of hubco, allowing utilising local labour, and any other support for a territory partnering board. There's no bill for that. No one gets charged for that. That's what these guys bring to the party in terms of making hubco a viable business. So it's all that sort of core team cost, making that a viable business. The other strand to hubco is the project development strand. Now that's where a participant will come along and say, I want you to develop and procure and build a new school for me. There's obviously a cost associated with that. And that cost is basically hubco going to the supply chain and tendering, doing development work, and everything that entails. And so you would get a scope, you would get a price, it'd all be competitively tendered, it'd all be open book. Participant would be involved in the selection process. It's not something that's done and we say, right, there you go. I'm involved in the selection process, and we're actually going through that at the moment on the WPTI school at the moment. So that's where you would potentially have a bill. So, and you would expect that, because that you're asking for an element of work to be done. The other area where Michael and I are very keen in developing is where we provide strategic support. Now, where a participant maybe not clear in what their project is going to be, they know there's a need or a requirement, and they're maybe thinking, well, maybe need some specialist advice around an element of work. That's where Hub, I feel, bring lots of benefit in terms of access to those specialist services in a very quick and simple manner. There's no add-on cost for that. If Hubco go and get a specialist service around your master planning, analysing a need in a certain area, they'll tender it. You guys are involved in the tender, I'm involved in the tender. We pick who we feel is delivering best value for money. One of the major criteria of that choice will be around local benefit. What are they actually bringing to the party in terms of, rather than just delivering the support service. And then they're appointed. If they charge 50,000, you get charged 50,000. Hubco don't add 12% and pass it on to you. I think it's an area where I think we would like to have the confidence, and we've had discussions with a number of individuals within your organisation around, give us an opportunity and we'll show you what we can do. So I suppose I'm just putting that out there for you to consider. So looking at value for money, because I think we talked about value for money, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. There's a lot of good stuff in there. About 80% will be tendered. So if, I don't know, Morrison Construction or Galliford Try win a major project in this area, they'll be required to put 80% of that work out to the local supply chain. And you'll be able to audit that. You'll be able to look at that. That's one of their key KPIs. They'll have to explain how they're going to do that. They'll have to evidence it. We also, during the procurement process, we developed a number of financial caps around different services. That was all done competitively. So again, you've got this cap there, so it's a ceiling price for certain elements of work. So you've got that, you've got the market testing. We benchmark against other projects. We've got a library of projects, and it's all open book. So there's maybe a perception that this hub thing, how can it possibly provide value for money? And I possibly did that myself before I get into it. Because it's a 25-year relationship. So, and it's like you go to the hub, but all the hub do is they make sure that it's the value is driven to the to the end. But what this slide doesn't say, and below that there's all sorts of stuff there around KPIs. But what this slide doesn't say, and it should say under value for money, and I believe is that it should say, well, what else is it bringing? And I'm actually doing a bit of work in this at the moment around it. Projects aren't about projects. They're about delivering all the stuff that you would expect them to do anyway. But then what else are they actually delivering? How many graduates have you employed? How many people out of work have you taken in, maybe given training to? How many school placements have you brought in? And all that sort of stuff. And that's a huge criteria when we actually appoint someone. We look at that clearly, and we look at the proposals around that. And that contributes to the scoring of people who are going to get work from the various participants. So I'll not go through that in detail, but I think we can defend these sort of reasons for why to use Hub. You don't need to go through overdue procurement, so that immediately saves you 6 months in terms of procurement time. We reckon that's between £25,000 and £30,000 in costs. There's immediate access to different types of service, but I think more importantly, it gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of who's going to be doing that work for you. And, I'd urge you to think about that. So, Michael's going to talk now more about the supply chain, because I know you had a lot of discussion on that this morning. So I'll hand over to Michael McBrearty.
Hi, thanks, Bill. Just before I start, sitting out in the room next door, there was a few issues that were raised, which I'm glad they're actually raised, and it sits pretty well with the presentation. One was, I think it was Gordon had raised it around KPIs and being held to account, transparency. That's music to our ears now. That's what we're about, and that's what we will demonstrate, and that's what we're in the process of demonstrating through our pipeline. Capacity was something else that was raised, I think, but that was not capacity of Hub, but capacity of the supply chain. And I think that's a real important issue and a real challenge for Hub and for the success of Hub. And there was another point, I think, raised around annual reports. There was almost, we should demand there would be an annual report from Hub. Well, that's a contractual obligation of Hub to provide an annual report to bring you up to speed on an annual basis on the success of Hub. Whether that's across what we're doing through community benefits, through KPIs, and how we're actually achieving them. So I think through the currency of this presentation, if I press the right button, I'll be able to demonstrate. So what is Hub in respect to the supply chain and Hub Southwest? Well, there's three key constituent parts which I think are important and which you guys would be interested in hearing. One is the territory supplier network. This is to encourage the participation of local contractors, and I'll come on and I'll talk about that in more detail. But it's a network, it's a database of local contractors across the whole South West Territory. One of the key advantages of Hub South West, or the Alliance Community Partnerships bid for this project, was that we committed to a supply chain institute. What does that actually mean? And there's obviously a description there. It's delivering a business improvement programme for the benefit of businesses and suppliers associated with South West Hub Territory. And again, I'll come on to that in more detail, but that's again looking at the supply chain that we've got within the territory, and specifically within Dumfries and Galloway, and identifying where there are business improvement measures that these companies need, whether they can go onto the supply chain or the territory supplier network because of those skill sets, or to improve them if they are on there. And the third key strand there is the Skills Academy. I think one of the key drivers of Hub and the success of Hub is making sure that we improve the skill sets of our young students and existing workforce to provide apprenticeships, training and support to allow them to return back to work and to enhance the supply chain generally. Before my time, but Alliance Community Partnership done a survey across the whole South West Territory, and they identified that of the work carried out in the territory, 65% of the work was being carried out by national contractors, with 35% of that being done by contractors within, based in the territory for the territory. We committed as part of our proposal that for the work that we win, or the work that is put through Hub, that in a 5-year period we would look to convert that from as the graph shows, from 35 to 65, which is a huge commitment. But it's a commitment that requires not just the measures that we've put in place in respect of KPIs and in growing that territory supplier network, but it's also it depends on the workload and pipeline that the participants put through the Hub vehicle. So I said I was going to talk briefly about the territory supplier network. There are a number of bullet points there, but I'll pick up on the main ones there. One is that we are a completely open network. We have in order to go into the territory supplier network, you have to submit a PQQ, and we've actually been in some dialogue with some of the local SMEs. And there was a point raised earlier about people struggling to fill in PQQs and the like. And a very simple example. Recently, we had a contractor who were unsuccessful in submitting, getting onto the territory supplier network. And our supply chain development manager phoned them up, went down and spoke to them, spent a day with them, went through the PQQ, explained what the problem was. And to be fair, with a lot of these SMEs, it's more the fear of filling it in as opposed to actually understanding the questions. And at the end of that, we've managed successfully to get that person onto the territory supplier network. That's just a small example of what we have done and what we're looking to do across a wider spectrum. So there's an obligation on the Tier 2 and Tier 3 suppliers to sign a supply chain charter in order to... And really, that supply chain charter is to buy into the KPIs that we are tied into. So it's about upskilling and utilising apprenticeships and the local workforce. So how are we going to measure it? I think this is a point that, again, keeps coming back to us, is that being accountable. We have there the Skills Academy, and we have the Supply Chain Institute. And how do we measure the success of that? Well, there are set KPIs within our contract which we need to deliver on. And a couple of them are listed below. If you take the Skills Academy, we need to provide modern apprenticeships, and there are numbers on an annual basis based on turnover that we need to deliver on. We need to make sure that we're engaging with the local schools and the local economy to provide work placements and training to work programmes. Similarly with the Supply Chain Institute, we recognise there are a number of businesses out there who find it difficult winning work or who don't have the skill sets to meet the requirements of our territory supplier network. So what we have put in place, and it's up and running now, is that we have a series of workshops, a programme of workshops, where we're providing health and safety training, business mentoring, programme management, And we're doing this in conjunction with a number of stakeholders, whether it's Business Gateway, whether it's Construction Online, and other organisations. And that ultimately will give us opportunities for people and opportunities for business improvement. So the Skills Academy objectives, we had set clear objectives. That's about creating new jobs. It's about delivering added value by providing more work placements and modern apprenticeships. Maximising the use of the Territory Delivery Plan. So we're looking at the Territory Delivery Plan. The Territory Delivery Plan is a plan that we pull together in conjunction with the participants to forecast the pipeline for Hub, so that we can actually look forward in a 5-year period and say, right, this is the workload, and therefore we can commit to clear commitments around objectives for training and apprenticeship and upskilling of local businesses. And that's all about promoting the benefit of Hub. It was about being accountable, and what we've tried to do. I know that there are, when you look at the delivered section there and the schedule section of where we are on track, we are under a year old. Our first projects have just recently got to financial close. So the Dalbeattie and Dunscore NHS project in this region is just coming out the ground. We have another couple of projects. We have one in the Isle of Arran, and we have a couple of projects for Irvine Bay Regeneration, which again are just coming out the ground. But what that shows you is clearly there's a target there over a 2-year period about what Hub is all about. So that's a really strong message there. Within a 2-year period, we're committing to at least 8 graduates to recruit them. So that's, and on top of that, we're talking about apprentice starts is 8, and even more importantly is apprentice completions, because we all can commit to starting an apprentice, but if the work dries up, how do you measure the success of that? And with our supply chain, we've got apprenticeship mobility, so where we have Graham's, Morrison's, and Kier. They've committed to work collectively, so that if they're starting an apprenticeship on one of their projects and that project comes to an end, there is apprenticeship mobility where they can actually transfer across to the other contractor, which is a really, really strong message. And it talks about collaboration. I know earlier the discussions there was about collaboration on a smaller scale basis when you're looking at smaller SMEs, but it also works really well when we're liaising with our larger contractors. So that's the list, and that's the target that we've set ourselves for the next couple of years, and hopefully when we provide our annual performance reviews, maybe not this year, but the following year, we'll have really robust figures which will be blowing those numbers out of the park. But that's certainly the aspiration. So the Supply Chain Institute, this is about increasing the territory capacity, because I definitely believe, I mean, we've tried to engage with the local supply chain across the region, and it has proved difficult, and we've actually looked within ourselves to understand why is that the case. We've looked at our marketing strategy, we've looked at our website, and I believe, I can't remember who mentioned it, but they were on our website earlier on today. If they looked at that maybe 3 or 4 months ago, it would have looked completely different. I think what we have now is a far more inclusive website. I think we understand our audience. I think there are clear links into the Supply Chain Institute, into the Territory Supplier Network and the Skills Academy. So therefore it's making it far more accessible to who we believe our audience is, and our audience is our supply chain, and we won't be successful without them. Appreciate with time marching on, but so really our objectives they're looking at is looking at the pipeline, having certainty in the pipeline, allowing us then to upskill that supply chain. So there are a number of bullet points there, but I won't go through them. Again, these are targets in respect of trying to provide business improvement workshops with our supply chain. So again, there are targets there for the next 2 years. Some of them are delivered, and some are scheduled over the next 6 months. So just to give you an example of the things that we're doing, since our inception, we've had 20 Meet the Buyer events. We targeted 20 Meet the Buyer events. We've had 9, with another 14 delivered. I think there was one earlier on the week in Lockerbie. I was at one previously down at Crichton, which I believe was a huge success. We have obviously business health checks, PQQ improvement workshops. There was a lot of dialogue earlier on, sitting in the back room, about how do we engage with our local supply chain, how do we improve them as a business, how do we engage with them in the business. We have a team dedicated within Hub South West to improve that. So we have territory supply chain development manager. We have a skills coordinator who's just come on board from the CITB. And these people, I mean, that is their job, is to make sure that we meet those targets or better those targets. And that gives you a clear, or a snapshot in time as to what we need to do and where we're at with it. Again, quick stats around opportunities. We have committed to, just recently, because we closed our last deal last week, in the region of £12 million in contracts awarded. We're at the early stages of that, so in total we've sublet 2.3 million of that to Tier 2 and Tier 3. Of that 2.3 million, there is 2.3 million in the territory, and I accept that the territory covers not just Dumfries and Galloway, but an important point there is that of the 2.3 million, 600,000 of that is going to contractors within the Dumfries and Galloway region, which is a chunky number. It's 25%. I think that already is showing us a success. So that kind of gives you a quick run through. We've put up our links, as you see, where we have our website. We're engaging with a local supply chain through Twitter. So anything that happens in respect of Meet the Buyer events, any other workshops, our supply chain are following us on Twitter. They're joined up in LinkedIn, and they've got their website. So we have really engaged with them, and they get notifications anytime we do something. And on the back of that, all our workshops to date that we've planned have been fully booked. So it has worked, and our strategy has worked. We've also made it, I mean, I make reference to the website, and I would encourage you to go onto the website, but for a small SME, through the update on the website, they can actually register to be on our supply chain network and make application electronically through that, and it's quite simple and easy to do, which also allows us to formulate a more robust and up-to-date database of the subcontractors that are on board and where they're actually located. Try to keep that, because I know Bill tends to go on a wee bit, so I was trying to speed the time up, but that sort of kind of gives you a summary of where we are. You know, I think the next steps is that Bill was maybe alluding to it, is that how can we help you? If there's concerns there around engaging with your local supply chain and SME. I believe Hub as a vehicle can do that for you. I think you have a vehicle which you guys have invested in, your shareholders in. I'm equally accountable to you as I am to any other shareholder. It's a vehicle that you guys own, and we can set the criteria for your projects in respect of utilising that SME, because we're not constrained by the OJU rules, and I think it should be certainly something you guys should consider when looking at new project development.
Thanks very much, Michael and Bill. Quite a lot to take in. I think Godman referred to that you have to hear things 8 times before you understand them fully, but we won't ask you to do it 8 times. But perhaps if we could have a copy of your presentation, and we'll circulate it to members.
Okay. Alternatively, me and Bill could do it again for 7 times.
Yeah, well, that's it. Okay, before we move on to the questions we've got, just clarification. Godman mentioned the annual report, and you confirmed that you have an annual report. Can you also confirm that you'll identify clearly how much of the business, how much of the contract work goes to local businesses? Will that be included in your annual report? Just for clarification, you mentioned that 80% of the work has to be tendered locally, but that doesn't mean that the contracts will be awarded.
No, I think to be fair, we live in a competitive environment. We also have to look after the public purse. We need to demonstrate that we're getting value for money. So therefore, it's an obligation on our Tier 1 contractors that they are providing those opportunities. I think it's for the subcontractors then to make sure that they're being as commercial as they can. So I think the important thing is giving these guys the opportunity. And if we are providing them with the opportunity, then they're getting a fair crack at at the tender. I think an important thing to note as well is that this just isn't about opportunities for, I mean, you can look at Dumfries and Galloway as a separate council, but this isn't about providing opportunities for companies within Dumfries and Galloway to win work within Dumfries and Galloway. What Hub South West does is provides companies within Dumfries and Galloway to win work out with Dumfries and Galloway and within the territory, and certainly that might allow them to open up their area of work.
Okay, we've got a series of questions. If your question's already been answered, then you can feel free just to pass on it. First one we've got is from Councillor Prentice.
Thanks, Chair. I'm sure you guys will know that the council has concerns about design and build contracts. Some of the hub contracts are, of course, design, build, manage and maintain. How will you ensure quality is assured every step of the build? How do we get assurance on quality project management? For example, will council staff be involved in inspection?
Within the contract, first of all, the contractors that we've adopted, these contracts are design and build contracts, and we have part of the offering that we brought to the table was using 3 or 4 actually strong, robust tier 1 contractors. So first, the first safety net, if you like, is the best practice procedures that these companies adopt within their own organisations. The second part of that, there will be project management carried out by Hub staff. So we have so the degree of quality management from that respect. And on the larger project, particularly around the larger projects, if you take the DBFM type projects, if we deal with Dopiti and potentially Dumfries Learning Town, there are numerous checks and balances in order to make sure that that these buildings are built to the correct quality. With the DBFM projects, we have a funder involved, and it's obviously in their interest that these buildings are built to the correct quality. So we have what they call a bank's technical advisor. And additionally, we have an independent certifier who has appointment as an independent consultant who's appointed both by the participant and by Hubco, who ultimately signs off the building as being complete. There are standard systems and processes in respect of handover and commissioning, which includes the quality control, snagging, testing and commissioning, which all have to be done in advance of the handover. Added to that, particularly in the DBFM projects, we will have FM contractors who don't want to be inheriting something that they can't maintain. So likewise, there would be another added check and balance where these guys would be available for inspection. There isn't, to answer your question, there isn't within the contract a clerk of works on behalf of the local authority. If that was something the participant was willing or was wanting to fund, they're more than able to do that. But the way the standard form contract is set up, that isn't envisaged at this juncture.
Councillor Crothers and Councillor Dyke.
Sorry, could I just add something to that answer? I hear what you're saying around design and build contracts. They come in, do the job, disappear, and then you're maybe left with some issues around that. One of the attractions of Hub that I have is that the 3 tier 1s who are there at the moment, they're up for refresh in 3 years' time, or 2 years' time now. So they're only as good as their last job, really. And this is a 20-year relationship. Any poor performance would mean they would, I would imagine, be in a very difficult situation in terms of being maintained within that supply chain. So in this kind of long-term partnership type arrangement, the participants, I feel, have a lot more assurance around it. There's going to be high-quality performance, but if there is any issues, they'll be dealt with very quickly. Because if Hub have any feedback from that, because they say you're contracting with Hub, if the reputation of Hub is on the line, then I think there's much more strength to having things sorted, but maybe more importantly, I think they're going to be performing at a very high standard. I think we've got a lot more back up there.
Thanks. My question is very similar to George's. It comes in the back, I suppose, DG1 across the road. That was a design bill. It's fairly, to say the least. Council's got their fingers burnt. Tier 1 contractors suppose kind of similarly, similar question to what George was saying. I mean, what will be in place? Because you're a new organisation, pretty much. You're rolling forward. What have you got in place to be absolutely sure that the council doesn't come across the same experience?
Can we just look at that scenario then? So you got an organisation and to build that for you, then my understanding is.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you? We're acutely aware that we're obviously in a action with one of the contractors, and I would prefer to keep the conversation more general.
Yes.
If that was okay.
If there is an issue with a hub project, the organisation that's delivering that project, as I said, is not there. Hub currently have a programme valued at roughly £400 million, and the three main contractors who are there at the moment have to compete for every job. They have to sort of get a bid in, a commercial and a quality bid for every job. So any poor performance would put them in a very difficult position in terms. So much more skin in the game, if you like, I think, in terms of ensuring that there's a quality product, and any issues with that are sort of sorted.
Yeah, I think the problems within particular jobs, I think everyone can reference a poor project, and there can be examples. You could have as many checks and balances on that project, and still have legacy or still have issues with that. I think the important thing is making sure that from a project management perspective that the right checks and balances and the right processes are being adopted. And that commences at the outset. So that's about making sure that we pick the right contractor, that we pick the team that they put forward in respect of delivery is the team that we get the right skill sets delivering that, and that the best practice procedures that these companies will deliver on, and which will be part of the overall documentation, is that we're satisfied there's an audit process that they're actually following that, and based on the people that we've got involved in Hub with extensive experience, the team that we've actually formed in-house and the consultants that we use have got extensive experience, not just in construction, but constructing revenue-funded type projects. So therefore, I don't have any, on these projects, I don't have any concern.
Councillor Dykes.
Is it okay, Richard, if I just pick up on one small piece? It's not going into any more detail, but in particular, who does the liability fall on? Say a project did go belly up, maybe a wrong way of putting it, but say it went completely wrong, the organisation performed poorly. Who does the onus fall on? Does the council got to take responsibility, or does Hub keep in control of that?
These will be design and build contracts, so therefore the risk is all transferred to Hub, which is then subcontracted down to the design and build contractor. So therefore they are taking the risk. Again, from my experience working on DBFM type projects, I mean we can break the projects into two, but there are huge financial penalties if the projects are not complete on time and to the required standard. In order for these projects to be handed over, they have to be certified, and it's an independent consultant that will be certifying it. If for whatever reason the independent certifier deems that the projects are not complete or are not built to the quality or the specification, it could be a change of specification without notifying anyone, then they won't get handed over. Any cost for rectification will not be borne by either by Hub or by the public purse. It will fall directly on the main contractor.
Right.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, it was really to do with corporate risk and project management, and I think you probably answered my question. I mean, bottom line is it will be all determined by the contract that's been put, the white paper contract that's put in place at the time. And as a council, we would just need to make sure that we weren't going to have any risk to that from a corporate point of view. And I'm presuming, just with the way you've answered the question, that the project management actually falls to the Hub to do that and not the council. Thanks.
Councillor Galloway.
Yes, just in your response to the question originally, you mentioned something about an independent surveyor who would be talking about itself. Is that right? That would be overseeing, so because we wouldn't put a project manager in or anything like that, the way it is, but there would be somebody there that would be independently monitoring what was going on. That's the issue.
As part of the standard form DBFM contract, there will be an independent certifier. That independent certifier will be an independent consultant. That independent consultant appointment will be procured via a tendering process, and it will be scored based on using a sort of 70-30 type scoring mechanism in respect of quality and cost. We will then select, Hub will then make recommendation as to that appointment. When we finalise that appointment as part of the project documentation, that appointment will have responsibility to both the participant and to HubCo. The importance there is that is the independence. You know, so therefore they're not handing over a building to you that may have legacy problems. So yes, it will be someone who is independent. So therefore somebody that we can influence in order to force the certificate, and that person would have the requisite professional indemnity insurance required under those sorts of contracts.
Can I just follow up on that? Do you have somebody in place right from the very beginning of the contract, or do they come in towards the end to make sure that we can sign it off? And would we as a council be able to have them here give us an update on the progress?
In respect of the contract, once we have finalised the contract at financial close, all appointments then become active. So their appointment will be from the day of financial close, and they will have duties throughout the currency of the project until handover. So therefore, their obligations will be around health and safety, will be around quality control, will be around compliance to make sure that they're building what they said to build, and if there's any changes that have any changes that may arise during the currency of the project, that they're vetting them to make sure that that wouldn't cause a compliance issue. And then ultimately at the end of the contract, the contractor would offer, through HubCo, would offer the project up for acceptance on the basis of completion, and the independent certifier would either accept that or reject it with conditions in order to resolve. But it's a collaborative process, so if there's any issues that they generally are identified during the currency of the project, again from my experience on numerous other PPP type projects, DBFM projects, then it's a collaborative process, and these things are resolved as and when they arise to make sure that we don't have any problems. Once, if there's a problem in the ground, they wouldn't fix it after they'd covered it up. So it's making sure that those think that the rectification measures have been completed and are recorded to make sure that those issues are closed out. But those types of issues are discussed and recorded on a monthly basis at the progress meetings, which the participant with the Dumfries and Galloway Council will have representatives there.
Thank you. Councillor Maitland.
The council and the councillors are very anxious to grow the private sector in our area. We are, I think, not providing the jobs as quickly as we should. That much came through Gordon Mann's presentation earlier on. One of your objectives is to assist local businesses. One of your key objectives is to increase opportunities for local employment and training and other community benefits. I have to say the council already runs quite a number of courses. Rona is involved very much in increasing the access to procurement. But what I want to know is what you're going to bring to the table, what you are actually going to provide for us, in addition to what we, the council, already do. Your website indicates that any booking was to be done via the council. So I'm wondering what you actually are bringing to the table over and above what the council is doing. And after you've told me what that is, how am I going to monitor that?
We have already, to date, engaged, I think I touched on it with the Chamber of Commerce, with Business Gateway, with Construction Online, with the Supplier Development Programme, and we've set up a series of individual events, workshops, and we've set up a number of joint events. The difference that we can provide to the table is that we have a pipeline just now that stands circa 400 million. So these just aren't events and then people come, turn up to the events and then disappear. I mean, our challenge is I mean, we're sitting there with a pipeline and we want these guys engaged. I mean, let's no two ways about it. If we don't meet our KPIs, then we won't be here. So we are heavily incentivized to make sure that, one, we're engaging with these people, whether it's through Meet the Buyer events, but we actually think probably better is that by engaging with these, with other development programs, collectively, that we can not only engage with them, but help improve their business. So I think it's the additionality, it's bringing that commercialism of engagement with their tier one contractors that's getting them familiar to them. Because a lot of our tier two and tier three contractors, it's only now for the very first time, even contractors within Dumfries and Galloway have never engaged with Morrison's, have never engaged with Kier, have never engaged with Graham's before. What we're now doing is providing access. They're now on the territory supplier network. But that just doesn't mean they're on Hubco's territory supplier network. They're now on each of these tier one contractors' supply chains, because once they come onto our supply chain, they're also on the wider supply chain of our tier ones. So their exposure and opportunities is greatly enhanced as a consequence of Hub. So from that alone, I think there is huge benefits. But where there's skill shortages, I think that, I mean, we're only at the start of this journey, you know, and I think we've got great aspirations for the territory supplier network. We've got great aspirations for the Skills Academy. And we need to understand where those challenges are, and those challenges will materialise and will change over time, and it's up to us to respond to that. In order to respond to that, we need to have the right resource in place, and we need to have the right expertise. And as it stands at the moment, we're relatively young, but we have a supplier supply chain development manager whose background was Business Gateway, who has got great access into the economic development teams within the local authorities because he knows them. He has great access to understand funding. So that's where we're bringing that additionality to local contractors to not only tell them about these things, but give them real advice on how they can actually access this funding. Top to that, as I said, we've just recruited a skills coordinator who's came from the CITB. Again, that's bringing somebody with real skills that has real access to these types of opportunities for local business.
Do you let me come back? But how would okay, my second question was how would I monitor that? But I'm still not completely clear what extra, you know, apart from providing a sucking great an amount of money, 400, 500 million pounds worth of investment in public assets to happen in the area, which of course stretches from Cumbernauld. We actually probably got more in common with Ireland or Preston, actually, with Cumbernauld. I mean, in terms of actually what we want as shareholders, representatives locally here, we want value for our people. And it's not clear to me what percentage of the SMEs, for example, I don't know how I'm going to monitor this. We've got SMEs who are involved in businesses, but I don't know how I would monitor your involvement with our SMEs or indeed our micro businesses, which actually are legion in this area. So can you explain to me how I would monitor your engagement with our people, our business community?
We have a database of all our tier one, tier two contractors, which is the territory supplier network. We know exactly their postcode and what region that they're operating in. We report on an individual local authority basis, if we take that as a region, and we report against a territory basis on the amount of opportunities that these organisations have had, and across our tier 1 suppliers. And we also monitor the value of work that these guys, that these contractors are successful in winning. That, so therefore that, I think there was a point made earlier on, I think maybe a slight criticism towards the council is that how do we monitor that? Well, the point is we need to be accountable, so therefore we need to have that information to give you guys the confidence that we are delivering on our KPIs. So therefore we have that information, and we'll continue to update that information as more projects come on board and as more subcontractors are engaged and as more subcontractors are provided opportunity. So if that answers your question, I hope it does. It tells you the amount and level of opportunities we're providing to subcontractors within all the regions.
Councillor Dykes.
Sorry, it's really just on the back of what Councillor Maitland's been asking. Obviously, you had a slide that showed some information, which basically what your targets were, but what you had to deliver today and what your ongoing target would be. And as a council, we have been particularly keen to try and assist with apprenticeships and extensive graduation programmes. We've actually set aside £5 million, and we are actually employing apprentices on a regular basis to try and bring younger people back into the workplace. And on the slide that you showed, there obviously was a potential for you to engage with additional apprenticeships and graduate through a programme, but I'm presuming that means with the contractors that you work with. And I think it was on that basis, I think Councillor Maitland was trying to see how could we actually see how that progresses going forward, you know, because on the slide today, I think there was nothing against those particular target areas today, and you did say when you gave your presentation that there would be further feedback to show us where you are now and where you intended to be in a few years down the line when things began to come on stream. So we can appreciate that you're at the very early stages. I appreciate that. It's quite difficult for you to give us that information at the moment when you're at that early stage. But when you're awarding contracts, do you ask the people that you're awarding the contract to take on a percentage number of apprentices from that particular area? So, for example, you're doing Dumfries and Galloway, so you have awarded those contracts for Dumfries and Galloway. So when you awarded the contract, was part of the contract stipulation that people who were awarded these contracts took on an apprentice, for example. And I think that's where we were trying to get to.
When there is a tender submitted, part of the scoring criteria, the tenderer has to put in a proposal around apprenticeships, trainees, engagement with SMEs. Now, the targets that you actually seen on that table were, they're not really targets, they're commitments to date from tenders that have actually been issued up until September. It's a very small proportion actually. So, and that table then is actually updated, and it's a KPI. They're all actually KPIs, and they actually have to be updated and reported 3 monthly. So every 3 months we go through that and we see where we are in terms of what's been delivered. So you have that visibility.
Okay, so if we came back, that would be our way of monitoring how things were going forward. Really?
Definitely. Okay. And what you would expect to see then is when, for instance, there's another big job comes through, then those targets will increase. But then obviously as we go further down, there'll be more delivery on them. So, and they're reported every 3 months.
So, I just wanted, because I did stipulate about the Dunsker and WT contract, I wanted to know if there's been any apprentices on throughout that contract.
I would like to confirm that we have already recruited our first apprentice on the WT Dunster.
Thank you.
Good.
It was similar, I suppose it's just on the feedback, you've said that it will come back every 3 months, but particular when Jane was mentioning it, I thought, how do actually the council see that? Because that, I would imagine that would be reported through the scheme of delegation. How do the members on the table actually see that information if they want?
That's reported. That's reported to the Tertiary Partnering Board, and the chair of the Partnering Board is Rona Wells. So Rona could possibly bring that to you. But if you have a requirement that you wanted myself and Michael to come back and report on that, we could do that. There's no issue with that. But there is papers produced around that. In fact, we're coming up to, we're just a year in, so there's a requirement for the hub to produce a performance report which will summarise all our KPIs in terms of where they are. As I say, we just started a few jobs in site. But that would be circulated, and you could have a look at that and then have another discussion with it.
I suppose it's more, I would understand it, and that's what I was talking about through the scheme of delegation. It's more for the Lorna or Rona, if they could confirm how that would get fed back to the councils at that point.
I think it's really at an early stage, and that information is now coming through, and I'll clarify and let members know what the intention or suggestion is about how that received and what committee. Clearly, that notwithstanding.
Thanks. We've still got a number of questions, but I'm conscious that the ladies travel quite a big distance to be here, so if you can make the questions short and sweet and the answers the same, but get the same points across, then that would be. Colin.
Thank you, Chair. Question number 3 has really been answered, but I've got a supplementary to that. So what guarantees do the hub give that the main contractors will pay the smaller contractors down the line? As part of our tender submission, and it links probably to one of the early questions around similar but different around commitments to apprenticeships and the like. As part of the submission, we asked the question around how do they deal with their subcontractors and payment, and that's part of the tender process and how they respond to that. Similarly, we are tied to the contracts and the Housing Regeneration Act in any event on the timescales that we should be paying them. So there's obviously a fallback position. Another thing that's being talked about at a more national level within Hub is the use of project bank accounts. Now, they haven't manifested themselves within Hub yet. They're looking to test it out in one of the Hub projects. I'm just putting it out there on the basis that this is something that the SFT are looking at to address the issue around payment to smaller subcontractors.
All right, we've heard a lot about the benefits of the hub. What are the drawbacks? What are the disadvantages? How can they be overcome?
There's no drawbacks. Give us. No, I think the challenges for me is that we have a pipeline that hasn't really changed from when I first came on board about 7 months ago. In order to deliver on our KPIs, we need some certainty around the pipeline. We need to be looking beyond the here and now. So therefore, for us, it's fine sitting here responding to your questions, but similarly, as a shareholder and a participant within Hub, we also need projects coming towards us so that we can actually we can deliver apprenticeships, we can finish apprenticeships, we can take a long-term view on how we can actually grow businesses. So I think that's the challenge. You know, the other challenge is that we are a new business. We are at the start of a journey. We need to demonstrate to the participants that we can deliver. We've got a number of projects now that we've closed and we're delivering. So I think the challenge for us is making sure that we deliver on that we make sure that the participants have a positive experience, but deliver them on time and on budget without any issues. And then the challenge is just as a new business, making sure there's a lot to be done in a short period of time.
but we make sure that we're delivering to KPIs.
A more specific question, we were discussing at our pre-meeting that some contractors come in from other EU countries and different regulations, such as licenses needed and qualifications. So who's legally responsible and accountable for health and safety in a hub project? What sort of regulations do they have to follow? The international standards?
We're governed by UK legislation, which is not dissimilar to European legislation, where our Tier 1 contractors, our 4 Tier 1 contractors, are national UK contractors, operating under ISO 9001, 14001, and 18001 for environmental and health and safety and quality, which are international standards. On top of that, so I think I don't perceive any issues.
Councillor Dykes, maybe a follow-up.
Thank you. In the construction industry, obviously there are some issues surrounding health and safety, and I know that the construction industry has certain standards for health and safety. Now, you've mentioned the legislative part of that, but can you tell me what standard hub contractors work to? So I'm in particularly interested, do they work to the Achilles standard, which is one of the better standards from a health and safety point of view, and one that is compliant with MOD, Scottish Power, and lots of larger organisations like that. And I'm just keen to understand that the hub are making sure that their contractors work to that standard. So can you tell me if it is the Achilles standard that the contractors are working?
Apologies, I'm not familiar with the Achilles standard. However, as part of the selection process, prior to my own involvement and engagement, the consortium that was pulled together with Kier Construction, with Galliford Try, Stroke Morrison's, and Graham's are of the largest contractors within the UK, who are part of the main, Kier and Galliford Try are part of the main construction group forum, and so I'm not sure whether I can give you a clear statement on the question. If you want me to go away and provide some information on that, I can do that. But I would be, I'm just talking from my knowledge.
Perhaps you can find that out for us and provide the answer. Councillor Dykes?
Yeah, it would be very helpful if you could come back with that, because I'm not particularly talking about the main contractors, although I would be interested in that, but I'm sure they are qualified to that particular standard. But it's about the supply chain that's raising concerns with us, and that's what we want to be clear about. So it's the health and safety standard that the follow-up down through the supply chain are working to. And I would have thought that should be to the Achilles standard, but I would just like to know whether that was the case. If you can't answer the question today, I have no issue with that, but if you could report back, that would be helpful.
What I can say is, and having extensive experience working with contractors akin to Kier and Galliford Try, is that they would not allow subcontractors onto their sites if they weren't complying with their own internal quality assurance and governance procedures. So therefore, there will be strict induction, toolbox talks, and the like. And the incident ratings that our contractors have got, as it stands in what they're reporting in, are of the highest standard. But I acknowledge what your concern there is, and if I can provide some feedback separately on that, I'll do that to give you some comfort.
I'll finish Councillor Dykes' next question. There's been concerns about construction companies blacklisting workers who have a trade union connection to health and safety concerns. What will you do to assure us that there will be no blacklisting on your project, on our project?
We have a confirmation from our Tier 1 contractors that they're not involved in blacklisting. There has been recent accusations around a particular contractor within our consortium, which that issue with one of the trade unions has subsequently been resolved and the accusation revoked. And recently I was asked and have confirmed to Unite that hub is totally against the practice of blacklisting, and we've went on writing on that to Unite, and that's been supported with our Tier 1 contractors.
Thanks for that assurance. Have you got another follow-up question, Bill?
Just one follow-up question, and it's really to do with European Working Time Directive and how you ensure that the companies, in particular the supply chain companies, actually work within the correct European Working Time Directive. How do you do that?
This is really a hard gig, isn't it?
Sorry, I did study procurement law, so apologies, but I'm just asking a few questions.
I would have to come back to you on that, on the systems and processes.
Right, is there any final questions before we wrap up this part of the section? You want to, Lorna, you want
I think it'd be helpful if we get the slides and circulate them. There's an awful lot of information on the slides that I think contextual for members to have a further look at. I think the main areas of debate have been around assurances in terms of quality of contract and how the councillors and council can be assured around that. And you've explained around the independent certifier and some of that process. And I think following on from that, about how members are kept up to date with the work of HubCo and the progression making against KPIs and through your annual report. And that's something we'll come back to you on. I'd like to take that forward with Fiona. But also in terms of any individual projects and how that might work around the independent certified and regular updates to your own lead officers. I think that would be to building that assurance and confidence, but that's something we want to look at going forward. There's also information there about the opportunities and success of Tier 2. I understand your territory supplier network both within the area and hub, and I think that should be regularly reported. We want to see that's we look to find out a bit more. There was a discussion around the involvement in terms of you and indeed more broadly with procurement secure public sector work, and I think that's something we'll look further. We'll have some further inquiries to ask some more information from, and a couple of areas of follow-up specific questions which we'll put in writing to get some further information, and also an assurance around the blacklist. But
I know there's a couple of questions which are still unresolved. Right, we've got a few recommendations. Receive a presentation from Hub Southwest Scotland on procurement and commissioning. We've done that. And consider the information and evidence this provides for the committee's review on procurement and commissioning. We'll consider that, and we'll be considering it further at our next. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank Bill and Michael for coming along, and could listen to it another 7 times. I don't think the overtime bill will stretch to that. Okay, thank you very much for coming.
Chair, could I possibly request a 5-minute break? Half. Right, okay, well, that 2 minutes I've got to make a
Welcome back, members. Just introduce you to Dorothy Cowie, Chief Executive, Scotland Excel. Thank her for being very patient and on with the show.
My tea will be ready for me by the time I got there. It's worked out well for me. So thank you very much for coming along. I thought I'd do a couple of things and fits the bill. First thing I thought I'd do is sort of set the scene about the national procurement reform, and that gives a bit of context how Scotland Excel came about and how we fit in. And then I'll give you a little bit of Scotland. Yeah. Were created really on the back of our and came out with some recommendations in 2006 about how public procurement could be done more efficiently, how we could make more savings, how we could sell to public bodies. And as a result of that report, structured Scotland Excel was one. We're the organisation for government. So it was really on the back of that Renfrewshire Council, taking the lead, got some funding to set up Scotland Excel on the back of an organisation that I believe Dumfries and Galloway was a member of, called the Authorities Buying Consortium, which was created when Strathclyde region was broken up. They kept the procurement bits together. In terms of the overall structures that are in place, there's a number of kind of high-level groups that are established. The first one that John McClelland put in place initially was called the Public Procurement Reform Board, so that's the red one on the left-hand side. And for the first couple of years, John McClelland chaired that group himself. And it's made up of a number of chief executives from right across the public sector. So there are, I think, 5 representatives from local government, 3 local government chief execs, Rory Mayer from COSLA and Colin Mayer from the Improvement Service. They all sit on that board, along with principals from universities, health board chief execs. When SNP took over the administration, I think that was 2007, they decided this public procurement thing was so important they wanted to chair it themselves. So over the course of the last few years, we've had, first of all, John Swinney chaired the group. We had Alec Neil for a little while, and it's now the Deputy First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, that actually chairs that group. When McClelland was setting up the structures, he was very keen to make sure that the supply side was also given a voice round the table. Obviously, procurement and public sector can change. That can have an impact, as we've heard some of that discussion throughout the sessions today. So he also established a group called the Public Procurement Advisory Group. And again, he chaired that in the early days, but it's gone through that same evolution. So it's now chaired also by Nicola Sturgeon, the Deputy First Minister. And you might be able to see on that slide, Federation of Small Businesses is represented on that, Chambers of Commerce are represented on it, as are the Scottish Trade Union Congress, CBI, and a whole range of private and third sector organisations all sit on that group with a voice that feeds into the reform programme about what's going on. That's the group in the middle. And the group on the far right-hand side, the purple, is the Procurement Review Delivery Group, and that's one that I sit on. And that's where all of the heads of the various centres of expertise get together to make sure that we're doing things consistently and that we learn from each other. That's what you might have seen before as the Scottish model of procurement. This is the Scottish Government's model, which is trying to balance off cost, quality and sustainability. And the 4 things that you see in the boxes are kind of the 4 key drivers for what the reform programme is all about. Delivering savings and benefits, making sure that we do that efficiently and we maximise collaboration, improving supplier access, which is a key thing to what the reform programme is all about, but making sure that we do that in a sustainable way, which is the bit in the centre that kind of fits around everything. The programme at the moment's got 7 strategic aims. Alistair Merrill's the procurement director in Scottish Government. He labelled them the 7 Cs. I have heard it said they're a bit like the 7 dwarfs. It's sometimes hard to remember all of their names, which is why I've got them in my slide pack there. But those just give you a sense of the kind of strategic aims that the reform programme is looking at. Making sure that we're getting better at procurement, making sure that Scotland's seen as a good place to do business with, and that we give SMEs and third sector organisations a fair crack at the whip, that we capture benefits, and I think there's been a lot of discussion today about measurements and benefits and how do we do that. A key thing that's come out over the last few years is about coverage and making sure that the corporate procurement approach reaches all of procurement in an organisation. And that where there are collaborative arrangements in place, unless there's a very good reason for not using them, then public sector bodies use those. Corporate social responsibility, as I've said, is kind of at the heart of everything. My previous employer was Scottish Power, and we had a CSR director, and he used to describe it not as corporate social responsibility, but common sense, really, which I think is a really sensible way to look at it. And communications, making sure that we're communicating effectively about what that reform programme is all about. So those are the strategic aims. In terms of the landscape, John McClelland talked about commodities as being Category A, Category B and Category C and C1. Category A are the things that the whole of the public sector buys. And there's an organisation called Scottish Procurement. You can see them under the central government body in that top left-hand quadrant. So Scottish Procurement, I've got a list of their contracts, but they do things like gas, electricity, IT, telecoms, office equipment, office stationery, things that doesn't matter whether they're in local government, health, higher or further education, everybody's buying it. They're doing collaborative contracts for those. And the other centres of expertise, Scotland Excel is for local authorities. Health boards have an organisation called National Procurement, which sits under their National Shared Services, and they do procurement on behalf of all of the health boards. And universities and colleges have an organisation similar to Scotland Excel called Advanced Procurement for Universities and Colleges, or APUC. Now, we don't buy everything, but we do try and buy where there are common requirements across the piece and where the market lends itself to something being done once rather than 32 times. Ditto in health and higher and further education. The Category C, A, B and C is explained along the bottom. So the Category C is stuff that councils will do on their own, and the other classification that McClelland came up with was a C1, and that's where public sector bodies, maybe in a geographical region, might want to get together. So it could be local authorities in a same geographical footprint, or the local authority, the local college, and the local health board getting together, depending on what the market, how the market's set up. So that's the kind of procurement landscape. And sitting at the heart of that is the reform programme and work ongoing to develop policy and guidance, systems and processes, learning and development for people, and a whole load of e-tools to try and get the consistency across the piece, which I heard both the Federation of Small Businesses and Chambers make reference to, that's a real advantage. I thought it would be helpful, and I won't go through this in detail, but I'll leave the slides. That's the current, well, as of September, those are the contracts that Scottish Procurement, so that the Scottish Government have got in place on behalf of the whole of the public sector. They're doing a lot of work just now, as are Scotland Excel on ICT, but those are the collaborative contracts that are available to all public sector bodies from Scottish Government. And some of the things that the reform programme has been delivered, I won't go through them all. Some of them you will actively be using. Public Contracts Scotland, the advertising portal. I joined local government in 2006, and one of the first messages I heard loud and clear from suppliers was it's really hard to know where to look for opportunities because some people were advertising in the press, some people were doing it on their own websites, but suppliers were having to figure out where to go and look. So Public Contracts Scotland was developed so that all public sector bodies are actively encouraged to advertise the requirements here, so that a small supplier in particular doesn't have to go looking. And that's set up with Twitter feeds and automatic messages, so a supplier can go in, identify the kind of categories that they're interested in, so that they don't actually have to go and look. They are fed with that information whenever anybody advertises one of those requirements. They get that feed automatically. And most public sector bodies are now using that. As are most organisations using the strategic sourcing methodology that Scottish Government have put in place. It's called the procurement journey, but that talks you through stage by stage. Here are the things that you should be doing. This is the approach that you should be using. And indeed, the Scottish Government's e-tendering system has got many of those things built into it. So all of the tools that the Scottish Government are making available to public sector bodies has a lot of that strategic sourcing methodology built into it to save people having to effectively reinvent the wheel. There's a flip side to that. So if you look on the Scottish Government's webpage, there's a supplier journey, and that's really helping suppliers understand the other side of the procurement journey. What does it mean for them? What do they have to do? A lot of work gone into developing the standardised pre-qualification questionnaire, and we heard the Chambers, I think it was, today talk about how helpful that was, trying to simplify that and standardise it. One of the things that's been interesting coming out of that piece of work, and again, I sympathised when I heard the messages from FSB and Chambers earlier. When it was first launched, it had all of the questions in it. I can't remember, something like 30 questions, and I think there's a fear of some people in public sector taking questions out. So people were sending questionnaires out with all of these questions. It's now been changed where the very shortest, briefest information is what's in it, and then you add the other questions in. Very, very simple thing, but I think quite important just in terms of people's perception. So that's been work in progress over the last couple of years. Whole load of stuff to do with procurement competency frameworks, the flexible framework for sustainable procurement, and Scotland Excel's done a lot of training on that tool. And indeed, we've managed to get ourselves to level 4 of that framework. Something that I thought you were interested in for today was about third sectors and how does that engagement happen. So one of the Scottish Government projects is developing markets for third sector providers. And there's a consortium being appointed to run that programme called Ready for Business. That involves KPMG, McRoberts, Social Value Labs, social firms, a whole load of organisations whose raison d'etre is to come and work with councils to help figure out how to best interact with third sector. First part of their work was really involved in community benefits, but they've had a lot of focus in the last 12 months in doing public social partnerships, and there's loads of case studies on their website that demonstrate how people have done that, and they're very, very keen to work with every council to help them do that themselves. And the last two are the kind of groups that I talked about, the Supply and Engagement Working Group, and the Scottish Government have a thing called the Single Point of Inquiry. So if a supplier is unhappy with any public sector body and wants to go to a kind of intermediary that will try and help them figure out what's going on, the Scottish Government run a group called the Single Point of Inquiry, and they look at all of those kind of things and try and arbitrate. So provided you're not going to take a public sector body to court, they'll act in that arbitration role, and they've done some good work and published a few reports on what they've found come out of that. So Scotland Excel, we were set up in April 2008. At that point, I think we had 25 or 26 of Scotland's councils as members, but over the course of the first couple of years of operation, we managed to persuade the remaining 5 or 6 to join. So we've now got 32 councils as members and have had for a number of years. We're governed by a joint committee, and Councillor Dykes is Dumfries and Galloway's member on that joint committee. It's 40 wide, so people often say, how can that be? Because there's only 32 councils. Every council gets to send 1 elected member, and the biggest 8 get to send 2. So that's why it's that size. Scotland Excel is a joint committee, so it's not a legal entity. We're not a private sector organisation, which quite a lot of suppliers seem to have a view that we might be. We are all actually employed by Renfrewshire Council because we're not a legal entity. So Renfrewshire Council are the lead authority and provide a lot of our legal and HR finance support. Most of us are based in Paisley in Renfrewshire Council's offices, but we've got regional staff who work in Aberdeen City Council, Edinburgh City Council and Highland City Council in Inverness. We're our kind of eyes and ears on the ground, if you like. And we work with members to do two things. One is to deliver collaborative contracts, and the second bit is to work with councils to get them better at procurement themselves. And we've got a key role, I think, to do in playing that. I've put these slides in just for information. I don't intend going through them in too much detail. 3 governance levels, the joint committee I've talked about. There's a subset of that joint committee we see probably about 7 or 8 times a year, 10 members in the executive subcommittee, and they approve all of our contracts. So we don't have any direct authority to approve contracts. That's all done by elected members. And the third group that I report to are 6 of Scotland's chief executives form my Chief Executive Officers Management Group. And I meet with them 4 or 5 times a year. So that really just gives you a sense as to the kind of key activities that each of those groups undertakes. I should say we had a new convener just at the middle of last year, and he's very focused on making sure that the might of local government's purchasing power is used to do things like community benefits, blacklisting, the living wage. So we've seen a lot of activity on that front because of the drive from our new convener. That's what the executive subcommittee does, and that's the responsibility, the sort of day-to-day supervision of our performance lies with the chief execs. And just so that you know whose names are in the frames, those are the 10 councils that are on the executive subcommittee and the 6 chief execs that I report to. We've got 5 strategic aims. Stakeholder engagement is really at the heart of what Scotland Excel does, and that's with both local authorities and with the supply base. Delivering best value contracts, working with councils to get them better at their own procurement capability, corporate social responsibility, and making sure that our organisation is kept up to date and it designs and develops and evolves itself, and that we don't stand still. Just an overview of our contracts. This was at September. We had 43 contracts on our portfolio, with an annual value of just over £400,000 a year. I should say we've got a huge range of suppliers. You'll see in the second bottom bullet on that. We've got round about 400 suppliers for those 43 contracts. And you see 68% of them are SMEs, and more than half of those are Scottish based. We have, it ranges from we have a sole trader that delivers lab equipment, has just re-won a new contract on that, right up to big national organisations like Break Brothers, who do the groceries, frozen food. They're a national organisation based in England, but they employ 400 or 500 people in Scotland. And one of the ways where we have that range of suppliers is because of the way we structure our contracts. And I think there's quite often a perception that because it's national contracts, if you can't supply the whole of Scotland, you don't have a chance of getting on the framework. But in actual fact, we lot them into geographical lots, usually by local authority, and product lots as well, so that we encourage all sizes of organisations to bid for our business. And indeed, we awarded some contracts just in September for tyres, and there are 2 local Dumfries and Galloway based suppliers on that contract who only want to supply Dumfries and Galloway, and they're on that framework. We've got some furniture, EME, local Dumfries and Galloway based supplier who supply about 26 local authorities through the Scotland Excel framework. They've had about £400,000 worth of business over the last 3 or 4 years. About 20 of that's come from Dumfries and Galloway, and the rest of that's come from the rest of Scotland. So I think one of the things that I reflected on listening to the first presentation today was we probably need to do more to get those messages out there and to work really hard with Federation of Small Businesses and chambers to make sure that some of the beliefs that they have, that some of the members have, that we do some case studies that illustrate that that's not necessarily the case. So we develop our contract portfolio in conjunction with the heads of procurement through a process that we call the Commercial User Intelligence Group. And really at the heart of developing those contracts is working with users from councils through a process that we call the User Intelligence Groups, where they come in, help inform us what's important for them, what their technical requirements are, what their wider economic requirements are, and that's what we try and bundle up into these contracts. We've learned over the last number of years that active engagement with the supply base is really important, so we've moved that activity up much earlier in the process. Most of our recent contracts, we've put a pin notice out to let the marketplace know that's what we're doing, to let them know what our strategic direction is and giving them an opportunity to come in and influence that. And then the bottom one's a fairly new thing that we've put in place as well, which is about getting a feedback loop to make sure that we understand from councils, but particularly from suppliers, if they're not bidding for our work, what is it and what is it we could do to improve on that. That's just a list of those 43 contracts. So you can see there's a huge range. A lot of those are new contracts that we've developed. Some of them were legacy ones that we brought over from ABC and we've renewed. But all of those foster care contracts, where there's big spend in the local government, those have been developed over the last couple of years. Waste is another emerging area for us, and some of the construction-related stuff and transport, those have been some big growth areas for us. And in terms of what's in our development pipeline, again, social care-related activities are really big. Construction, you can see the kind of contracts that we're looking to put in place there, and waste. And on the back of John McClelland's most recent review, which was about 18 months ago, looking at ICT, he's kind of said ICT could be done more effectively. So we've currently got some work ongoing to have a look at that area and develop it. So just to give you a couple of snippets as to why are those things on the radar screen. If you look at, as we do in Scotland Excel, spend right across all 32 councils, we have suppliers in that top category that are, councils collectively are spending £40 million a year with. And we've got 27 councils dealing with the same provider. And part of our rationale is, can we do something more effectively with those suppliers? Same on the ICT. There's a couple of suppliers that most councils are dealing with, but everyone's dealing with them individually. Quite a lot of those councils have performance issues with some of those suppliers. So part of the thinking is, can we get that consolidation and can local government speak with one voice rather than 32? Those are just from our 3-year business plan. Year 2 is for us to grow that portfolio. We've got a target in to achieve average savings of 5% across the piece, with the exception of the social care contracts. We've got targets in as well that where we set an estimated spend, we need to make sure that those spend figures are accurate, and we've got some targets to make sure that we work really closely with the councils to make sure that the spend is being channeled through those contracts and we haven't got off-contract spend. A lot of effort going into managing those contracts after they have been awarded, because there's a huge opportunity, I think, to continue to set targets for the suppliers and drive performance and added value out. So we are actively managing quite detailed bases. We had 10 and the target is to grow that to 25. Hosting and attending supplier development events, so Meet the Buyer. We're always happy to come and support any local Meet the Buyer events that are on. And as I mentioned earlier, the supporting and developing markets for the third sector programme. Just the last couple of slides, really, the other half of what Scotland Excel is there to do is really work with councils to help them improve their own procurement capabilities. And I'm assuming you'll all have heard of the Procurement Capability Assessment, which is the framework that everybody right across the public sector uses to assess how performance is improving. We've just started our 5th year of that, and that's been really helpful understanding what it is that needs to be fixed and how can we improve. So it started off 2009 and it wasn't a very rosy picture. It's a maturity model and most councils were in the first quadrant of that maturity model. We've just started, I think we've done 9 so far of this year's 5th crank of the handle. And so far, all 9 that we've done are in that improved quadrant. And that meets the Scottish Government's target. They set a target that said every public sector body should have been improved in March last year. When we did the assessments last year, we still had 14 councils in the conforming, which is the 2nd quadrant along. So we're really hopeful that we'll get most of those councils out and into that improved over the course of the next 12 months or so. So lots of work going on, lots of opportunities for an organisation like Scotland Excel to identify what's commonly missing across all councils, and we provide the glue and put in a lot of the effort to try and fix those things. And our objectives over the next 2 years is just to continue to do that work. I've put in just a few examples of this year's current activities, and I thought the last one in particular would be of interest to you about supporting the local economic agenda, because that is kind of at the heart of every single council's agenda. So we're calling it at the moment, it's a bit of a wicked problem, trying to juggle all of those things. But one of the things that we're doing is working with the 3 Ayrshire councils on a kind of pilot basis, and it's trying to make sure that we've got all of the data that's out there that allows you to understand that picture. So for example, we can look in Spikes Cavell and understand how much is being spent with suppliers in Dumfries and Galloway by all of the other councils, and how much are you spending with them. You've got a pretty good record, it has to be said, relative to some other councils. How many of those suppliers are registered in PCS tender? How many, so we've got government statistics about how many organisations are registered, and then we're cross-matching to see how many of them are registered on PCS tender. Trying to develop a kind of route path, if you like, through to give some councils guidance about how we can improve on that. So that's work in progress, and we're hoping to have some material produced on that by the end of this year. So that's a kind of summary. I've just ended up with a kind of list of, we've got a really, really busy agenda, as do every council's procurement team. Plus, we've got all of these emerging things that are, we're having to deal with. So all the e-commerce tools, the ICT recommendations. Next week, we're likely to hear the outcome of the Scottish Government's review of construction procurement. That's going to be announced at the conference, I suspect. We've got changes to EU legislation. We've got the recently published procurement reform bill. We've got health and social integration, and the whole next phase of reform. So it's a vibrant and dynamic in place, and I hope that kind of quick overview and context has been helpful for you.
Thanks very much, Doris, for that quick overview. I think on behalf of us all, we can give you an assurance that the procurement capability assessment is the first thing in our thoughts in the morning and the last thing on our thoughts just before we go to bed. Could I just ask Rona then, on the developing markets for the third sector, that provider project, are we involved with that, or is something that we could get involved with?
I'm certainly not aware we've been asked to be involved in that yet, but we'd be happy to do so, Dorothy.
I'm happy to send you the links, Rona. They've spent quite a lot of time, the Ready for Business project, over the course of the last 6 months, publishing a lot of information on their website. So there's some really interesting case studies about community transport projects that have been done with third sector organisations, early years intervention. So some really good stuff there, and I know they're there. It's a free resource for us all to use. So I'm happy to send you on that stuff, and if there's something that we can help to do to facilitate that, by all means, give me a shout.
Yeah, first forensic questions from Jill. It follows on from something which you said in your speech.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, you'll be aware that SMEs are the backbone of the economy in Dumfries and Galloway, and I think that we can't stress that enough. I've got to say it's interesting that obviously there's a base in Paisley, one in Inverness, one in Aberdeen, and one in Edinburgh. However, there is nothing in the south of the region, and I think for us, we find that particularly difficult to deal with. Well, I know I do. I mean, Excel's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you talked about stakeholder engagement being top priority in Excel. We feel in Dumfries and Galloway that actually we're missing out on that stakeholder engagement. I don't think there's ever been an Excel stakeholder engagement take place in Dumfries and Galloway. Now, the spend's 406 million, I think, for 43 contracts, really, with a view to you on your website last night. I was looking at the website as well last night, and I noticed that obviously you want to increase that to 780 million with a look at construction and a look at social care. For Dumfries and Galloway, we have huge benefit from using SMEs, small local SMEs, to actually provide that service for Dumfries and Galloway Council. And the last thing I would like to see would be for a big global or UK company coming in to our region, and then for these organisations that are the backbone of our economic area to actually be squeezed out. And I think it's important for us that stakeholder engagement actually takes place here. I would like to see a satellite area being in Dumfries and Galloway for starters. You know, you've got nothing south of the Central Belt at all. So we need to have something in this area. We talked about pilot schemes in Ayrshire, but actually I don't think there'd be anything wrong with having a satellite area here based in Dumfries and Galloway, which could look at the south area in particular, but also to do with stakeholder engagement. I think it's important that the businesses that are the backbone of Dumfries and Galloway and our local economy get an opportunity and actually can understand about how they can bid into the tendering process. And I would like to have an assurance today that we're going to be able to see that coming, moving forward.
Just a couple of things to say before I answer the assurance one, if that's all right. Colin Taylor is one of the analysts who's allocated to Dumfries and Galloway, and I know Colin's down fairly regularly meeting with Alan Priestley. We have a business review meeting once a quarter where we go through contract spend. Colin's made the offer, if you're having any meet the buyer events, we're always happy to come along and support that. That's really what their day job is to do. So I hope we do it. Maybe we need to think a bit more about the supply base, and particularly with the elected members, and I'll take that on board. One of the things about the where Scotland Excel goes next for the June meeting next year, I have to go back with a kind of refreshed 3-year business plan. So the current plan that we're working to come April next year, that's the start of the 3rd year. So by June next year, the joint committee meeting will be considering the next 3 years hence. And part of what we've got to figure out as part of that is this regional model that we've got in place, is it working? Is it still effective? Is it meeting members' requirements? So I'll certainly take note of the comments that you've made, Councillor Dyke, and make sure that that's fed in as part of that review and reflected in the report that comes to the joint committee in June.
Quickly.
I hope I'll be able to have my own input at the committee as well. I mean, I think it's important that the council is represented and that we look at SMEs in particular and stakeholder engagement as well. I would like to see a stakeholder engagement actually taking place in Dumfries and Galloway. I think that would be important.
Could I maybe just forgotten what I was going to say. Having a wee senior moment, sorry. Oh, it's gone. I beg.
Yeah, I think you mentioned in your speech about making more local businesses aware of what Scotland Excel does. So we'll look forward to that. Councillor Maitland.
Well, I think you partly answered this, certainly as far as engagement is concerned. It's about making certain that we learn from other people's best practice. And I wonder what else we could do to hear about best practice. I rather share Councillor Dyke's view. You probably saw my face when you saw Highland and Aberdeen and Edinburgh, that's right. So what else could be done down here to disseminate best practice with respect to procurement?
There's a couple of things. I'll say, when we've done the procurement capability assessments, we have a 2-day annual event, usually in Stirling, end of January, beginning of February. You can guarantee it snows that day. I think for the last 3 years we've had trouble getting everybody there because of the weather. And part of that's about making sure that the procurement community comes together and understands and learns from each other. We've actually got a huge range of capabilities. So when you look at the average scores across local government, the average last year was sitting just about 48%, so people just about to get ready to go into that improved score. But against each of the 8 sections of the procurement capability assessment, the range is actually getting wider and wider every year. So part of the thinking of that 2-day session is to have those that have done well share their experience and their learning with those who've still to get there. And I think the network, the procurement community, has really risen to the challenge of these capability assessments and are working really effectively. And I guess it's just about making sure that Dumfries and Galloway have got the time and the space to get involved in all of that. It's certainly all there. We're trying to do more as an organisation to make some of it available online, because we understand people are very busy, and distance can be quite difficult for some of the more outlying councils, outlying from the central belt, I mean. But we are trying to make sure that that information is shared, and I guess it's just council making sure that people have got the time to come along and do all of that learning.
Could I just very quickly follow up, which is just actually to ask about, I mean, we're doing our absolute level best to do more stuff together. I mean, it's a half-witted question, but shouldn't we be looking at this as a D&G procurement activity? I mean, do you link up with the NHS procurement side of things? I think we should be trying to do more of that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, to be quite honest, I mean, I think the procurement team here in NHS are, a lot of the procurement activity actually takes place in the central belt, and they don't actually have that many things left that are the same products and services that we buy that we could join up on. But what I would say is that the council actually takes the lead and procures on behalf of the NHS all the procurements from the joint commissioning team. So it's maybe not so much a collaboration, but we actually do it for them. So, thank you.
Okay, we've talked about best practice. We're always looking for good models to follow. And as a member of the Social Work Committee, I'm really interested in social services commissioning and procurement. Are there any good items, council, that we could look to for good practice?
We've done a couple of things with social work a couple of years ago, and I suppose the starting point was actually trying to get to the grips with, is commissioning any different from procurement, and bringing the social work community and the procurement community together to actually help them understand the language that each other speaks, because they do tend to talk quite differently, and I'm a procurement person through and through, so I'm as guilty as most, but that was really really successful in breaking down some of those barriers and getting people to figure out the best way of working together. It's a challenge for most councils, and that coverage piece that I talked about in one of the 7 strategic aims nationally. When we started the capability assessments at first, you found quite often that the procurement teams were very limited in what they were involved in. Things like construction, ICT, and particularly social care, they had no involvement in it at all. And that's still the case in very many councils. So I haven't got a big long list to give you, but a couple that might be worthwhile following up with. North Ayrshire Council have got a really good working relationship between their commissioning manager and their procurement manager. They've got some really good models in place for engaging with the third sector, and also working quite closely with the health board. So it's quite a joined up approach. And the other one that's probably worth going and having a look at is Argyll and Bute, because again they've done the same thing where the commissioner, in fact their procurement lady was the commissioning manager, so they've done a really good job of pulling those two things together and working out a way of working that's worth looking at. The other thing that I should have mentioned about North Ayrshire, they've done a really good job of implementing a very robust contract management approach with social care. And a lot of the focus that's been done on the management of social care contracts has been on the quality. And I think the bringing together the procurement and the commissioning has been people looking at the cost of that quality care as well. So there's two good examples. We've also got some really good experience in Scotland Excel of delivering social care contracts. And I'm quite often accused of, well, what's that got to do with procurement? Because, you know, you buy pens and pencils, social care's quite different. But I would give you a run for your money that that's not the case. You know, the evaluation criteria, some of that pre-selection stuff might be different, but in terms of the process that you're going through, I think it's very similar, and I think it's the blending of the commissioning and the procurement that ends up in, you know, people end up in a much better place. So those would be two that I would probably point you to for, you know, have done pretty well and are quite progressive.
So that's very good. We'll be looking forward to a trip to Rothsay.
We were just saying, Chair, that I nominate the 4 people that are left at committee.
Okay. Patsy? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've kind of discussed this, but just what additional value services do you think that you could provide Dumfries and Galloway in order to help us improve procurement and commissioning? Now, I imagine that, you know, the sort of stakeholders sessions and all that would be some of that, but there must be other things that can do which would just educate and give a bit of oomph, if you like.
We've done a couple of pieces of work for specific councils, usually on the back of the procurement capability assessment. I make the offer, so I write a note to every chief exec saying, you know, thanks very much for letting us in, because it is a privilege that we've got to come and work with 32 councils. Here's our findings. If you want me to come and explain it a bit more, I'm happy to do that. And out of a few of those meetings that we've had last year, councils have asked us to come in almost on a consultancy basis. So it's a, you know, flat fee. We don't make any profit, and it's much cheaper than the big 4 who are quite often sniffing around trying to provide that service. And we've gone in, we have a kind of model improvement plan that we've developed through the work that we've done with councils. And we've helped councils develop their own model plan, because some of the bits on our plan they've done, other bits that they haven't. But it's a sort of systematic change programme, if you like. And we work with them, plugging them in with people that have got, providing them with information if they haven't got it, with, you know, documents. And we're actively doing that with a couple of councils just now, just to help them get up that curve a bit faster. So that's something that we've already got on the go. One of the things that's...
Is that just a one-off thing, or is that an ongoing, regular?
It's mixed. So for some councils, we've gone in and we've done a wee short, sharp piece of work. We've got another council, a small council in the Central Belt just now, where we're in a couple of days a week, probably for the next 3 months, just helping them get the basic building blocks in place and get things up and running. Really just as a kind of outside pair of eyes, help and support them. So it's not really a kind of one pattern. It varies depending on what the council needs and what they want and how well they want us involved in it. Some councils have got big consultants in helping them do that work, and they've asked Scotland Excel to sit on their kind of sounding board, I suppose just as an external and a local government voice to make sure that they've got that level of support as well. So we're happy to work with councils on whatever model suits them best.
Can I just ask Laura or Rona, I mean, what do you need?
I mean, obviously, you know, we're grateful to members for approving the additional 3 procurement officers this year, but their work is very much to be geared towards savings and helping departments achieve their savings. And certainly it's something that we struggle with, is really to make that much progress year on year against the, if you like, the paperwork side of the procurement capability assessment, that we don't have a tremendous amount of time. I mean, from now until our assessment on the 5th of December, we will probably have 3 or 4 people working on it, trying to pull things and the evidence together. But that's a lot of resource taken out of what members want us to do in terms of savings and local suppliers. So any assistance that could be given, then yes, I would be grateful to have that.
That's something that we can put in the report and see what's available. Yeah, Councillor Dykes.
It was really just to say that that's not an uncommon position that we see, you know, relatively small procurement teams who, you know, I listed all these things that are getting thrown into the melting pot. And I think it's the treating the changes that need to be made as a transformation programme and resourcing it up. Those are really key things to making a difference. And I think that's what the battle that we've won with a number of councils, that if it's the procurement team and it's, you know, trying to make those changes and keep the handle cranking, then you'll make some incremental changes year on year. But if it's about actually fundamentally changing it and transforming it, then that really needs a kind of a dedicated resource to doing that. And we've seen in a couple of councils where they've had transformation programmes for other areas of the council. So you've had a kind of change manager work with the head of procurement to try and set up the programme and make sure that it's progressing. So again, there's lots of different models that we see across councils, which happy to share with you and provide whatever support we can to get you there, if that's required.
Thank you. It's really just on the back of the conversation that we're having here. I mean, I used to be part of the procurement team for ICI, bought for Europe as well as the UK. I think it's fundamentally important that we understand what we're actually purchasing at the moment. I know that we need to make savings, and that you know, obviously the additional buyers are really have really been brought in to actually make sure that goes ahead. But the issue sometimes is that there are hundreds of people out there actually procuring things on the back of what they've always done year on year. And we really need to bring that in-house, if you want to class it as that, to be sure that we know exactly what's happening. Because until we know exactly what's happening, you will continue to get departments spending what they would spend with the suppliers they would normally buy with. Now, sometimes that's pretty good practice. Sometimes people continue to buy and stock on a shelf something that as soon as they've used one, they buy another one. You know, there are lots of different ways in where you can and how you can actually procure. And I think it's important that the council, in particular, does understand what we are actually buying, who's buying what, and what the costs are for those. I mean, that's across Scotland. It's not just here. It's all over. And I think that it might be of interest to look at some best practice in other areas. I think that we're actually beginning to see a big difference here with Rona and her team. And I think it's important that we give a bit of credit for that. But I still think that there's probably a long way to go, especially as we go further down the line and money becomes more and more tight. We need to look at other things as well. And the specifications are very important, because there's no point in going out if you don't have a proper specification, because everybody should be tendering for the same thing. Sometimes that's not the case, and we need to look at that.
Okay, I think you covered national developments and procurement coming up over the next year. How can you help us prepare for new procurement legislation? How can you help us to prepare for that?
That's a good question. I suppose one of the things I'll endeavour to do is make sure that everybody understands it, and you know, local governments speaking with one voice. So I'm actually meeting with the Scottish Government with COSLA representative on Monday of next week, just to establish some relationships there, and then I need to work very closely with the local government procurement community, who I have to say, just to echo Councillor Dyke's comments, you know, they're all working really, really hard just now to make things better. But rather than us all speak with individual voices, if we speak with one, and then once we're a bit clearer about what comes out of that, if it's about developing procurement strategies, then we've got templates for doing it so that people aren't off having to start from scratch. But I think the first thing is about making sure that we've got the kind of, here are the key things that we will all need to change, and can we get together to agree how we do it consistently across our community. So that's probably as far as the thinking's developed on that front so far. Other than perhaps arguing for some of the things that we don't particularly like in that legislation, can we get out of it?
Councillor Dyke's the last word in this,
Thank
as
you.
a questioner anyway.
It was just, you know, if we go back to stakeholder engagement, I mean, obviously there's new legislation coming down the line. We've already heard there's going to be an announcement at the SNP conference, and there's Scottish Government legislation coming through as well as European. I think if we went back to having an agreement of actually carrying out a stakeholder engagement session in Dumfries and Galloway, then that's how to disseminate the information to the businesses that it might be able to help. And I think that that's what I would like to see. You know, the legislation is going to be changing. To get the businesses in Dumfries and Galloway to understand that, then maybe the best way forward would to have a stakeholder engagement in Dumfries and Galloway, where Excel actually came and did that.
I would be delighted to come down and do that. I know, you know, we're always keen to go out there and meet, particularly suppliers, because a lot of it is, there are urban myths, and it's better if, you know, if those are dispelled. So if that would be helpful, I would be delighted to come back. Or if there's anything else that you think Scotland Excel should be doing to help with all of these changes, then I'd be delighted to assist.
Yeah, and we'll be delighted to have you back as well. The last question is, I don't know if you've already answered it, is what Dumfries and Galloway businesses are involved in the delivery of Excel contracts?
The furniture organisation, EME, and as I said, £400,000 they've had over the last couple of years from 26 councils, and Dumfries and Galloway's proportion of that's 20,000. So they're obviously, you know, they're winning quite effectively, and I'm sure would tell you it was much better doing that under one tendering exercise than 26. We've just awarded the tyre contracts. I don't have any data on this because they've only just kicked in. But Sol Tyre Limited and D McIntyre Trading is Stewartry Tyres Limited. And the other connection, and again I can't give you any data, but Brakes Brothers is our biggest supplier against the Scotland Excel contracts. They do groceries, frozen food and meats. But what we're trying to do with suppliers like that is encourage them to work with local companies. So they use Brown Foods for both groceries and their frozen, and have been very active working with them to develop the supply chain within Scotland and talking to them about chicken, because we had a bit of an issue a while back with frozen chicken, which currently on the Scotland Excel contract is coming from Thailand. And part of the reason it's coming from Thailand is because the Tesco's and the Sainsbury's and the Morrisons and the Asda's of this world, on the back of the horse meat scandal at the beginning of the year, made a commitment to buy British. So all of those, the demand for that limited supply that there is in the UK has been hoovered up by the supermarkets. So we're trying to actively work with people like Brakes to say we need to go and encourage, you know, indigenous supply of that product. And Brown Foods is one of the organisations that they're working with. They're also working with Rowan Glen, so they're a big provider into Brakes for our contracts as well. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, you've got 5 seconds because it's now 5:30 and I'm leaving.
Thank you, Chair, for your indulgence. But actually, if we get our stakeholder engagement seminar in Dumfries and Galloway, I think that's one of the things that would be the best benefit to the economy in Dumfries and Galloway and to our SMEs, to allow them an opportunity to see what they can actually do, because the likes of Sol Tyre and Stewartry Tyres, etc., they'll have gone through the process, and it might be worthwhile actually using them to come and talk to others about best practice and about how they managed to go through the process, because they've just been brought on stream. You've got Brown Brothers, you've got EME, who obviously would like to continue with that, and I think we have businesses here who actually are part of Excel. I think we should use them to promote it to others. Interestingly enough, we did have a PPP contract which supplied several new schools, constructed several new schools in Dumfries and Galloway, and EME were not allowed to supply the furniture as the Irish companies went elsewhere.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have recommendations to receive a presentation from Scotland Excel on procurement and commissioning. Done that. And we'll consider the information and evidence this provides to the committee's review on procurement and commissioning. Can we agree we've done that?
Yeah, and
Okay.
well done, Chairman. Looking round the room, who's got stamina here? It's the women. Yes.
I'd like to thank Dorothy for coming down and being patient, and for the survivors of the four survivors and the two officials for staying on. I think it's been a long session, but I think I've learned a lot, and I hope you've learned a lot, and we hope we've answered a lot of questions, and that you feel that your journey has been worthwhile too. And we've got some points which you want to go through.
A signal from the floor about just a quick recap. There's a lot of information on the slides that Dorothy presented, and again we'll circulate them and record them as part of the evidence. Flag of a number of things around the national programmes and the interest politically around this. A number of interesting points that we may wish to pursue as a committee, particularly around things like Ready for Business and the work that's been done in the third sector. And also we heard examples of where Dumfries and Galloway businesses have been successful within Excel contracts. A commitment, I think I'm using that word, around stakeholder and supplier engagement within Dumfries and Galloway to do that, and local businesses' awareness of how to procure and how to tender and how to bid for those contracts. We heard about the PCA process and also the follow-up in the two-day event each year to share good practice and how we can connect to that, and also offers of assistance and different methods of that assistance that can be provided to the council in terms of supporting our improvements around procurement as we go forward. We heard about the ability to lobby around the new legislation, and that Excel are involved with that through COSLA. And we also heard quite a bit about some of the transformation programmes in other councils and some examples of other councils that we might like to look at and other organisations, both in terms of social services commissioning, but also more broadly in terms of good practice in this area for your consideration.
Sorry, Chair, can I just make sure that we've added in there that we have raised concerns about the SMEs being the backbone of the businesses in Dumfries and Galloway, and that we wouldn't like to see them penalised by bringing on stream the extra social care and construction side. And obviously we made those comments and you promised to feed that back into the process, and I would just like to make sure that that is done.
Clarify one little thing. It was just to say that when we structure these contracts with lots, geographical lots, no one is penalised if they can only supply one local authority, and no one gets extra points if they can supply all 32, just to try and keep that as a kind of a fair playing field.
Okay, I think that clarifies it. So once again, thank you very much for coming down, and thank you all, and have a good journey home, and you may get some tea before you go out again to